have the two items on the agenda, right? Okay. I got a little.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, I loaded this late this afternoon.
Yes, all yours. You seem like you're so far away tonight.
All right, good evening. We have two items on tonight's study session. The first beginning with the discussion and presentation from the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority regarding the Access Oklahoma Turnpike Plan. We have a delegation here, and you're welcome for the table because we're going to have a whole lot of questions for you. So I will turn it over to you to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. The audio is different in this exact spot than it is anywhere else. If I could have just a few minutes to introduce the people that that I brought with me tonight.
So sorry.
Okay. Starting on my right, your left, Kirsten McCullough is an environmental specialist and has done numerous environmental studies both for the Oklahoma Turnpike Authority and for ODOT and other municipalities in Oklahoma. Sitting next to her is Todd Gore. He is our right-of-way and right-of-way acquisition and utility relocation specialist for the Turnpike Authority. Sitting next to Mr. Gore is Brian Taylor. He is the chief engineer for ODOT. He's my counterpart on one side of the house. I'm actually serve as deputy director and chief engineer for OTA. Brian's chief engineer, again, for ODOT. Behind me is Rick Johnson. Rick is the director of project delivery for ODOT. ODOT and OTA share some resources in project delivery and maintenance and other aspects. So Rick is here to help with some of those, help explain, if we need to, some of the processes for both ODOT and OTA's project delivery. Next to Rick is David Streb with Poe & Associates. We hired Poe & Associates to manage this program through manage the bond program. We're a very small staff at the Turnpike Authority. We do not have a lot of employees. We utilize outside resources, typically through consultants. Poe & Associates performed the program delivery for the Driving Forward program, and so we've hired them to do the same for the Access Oklahoma program. Next to Mr. Streb is TJ Dill. TJ is the Director of Construction for the Turnpike Authority and will be the person that you'll want to get to know when it comes to any active and ongoing construction. On this side of the room, please help raise your hand. This is David Mockamer. He's the Assistant Deputy Director at the Turnpike Authority with responsibilities primarily over toll and the tolling aspect at the Turnpike. That's what sets us apart really from any other road operating entity in Oklahoma. Next to David is Jimmy Sparks. Jimmy Sparks works for Olson & Associates. We have a general engineering consultant. Olson is our general engineering consultant that handles some of the day-to-day inspections and things like that the Turnpike Authority has. Next to Jimmy is Darren Butler. Darren's the Director of Engineering for the Turnpike Authority. We've got about 6 or 7 people who typically work in our engineering department. All together at the Turnpike, there are 6 engineers. Darren represents that group. Next to Darren's Julie Porter. Julie's a comptroller for the Turnpike. She administers and makes sure payments go out and payments come in, manages that money. She's also going to help me tonight answer any financial related questions. Our finance director was unable to be here tonight, prior obligations. Next to Julie is Marcus Williams. Marcus handles Pike Pass and administers the call center that we have. A lot of folks don't realize we've had about 130 person call center that manages the calls when you dial 1-800 Pike Pass. They're all right here in Oklahoma, actually for the most part on the north side of Oklahoma City. Behind Marcus is Mark Kalka. Mark Kalka is our Director of Maintenance. Mark operates the Turnpike, handles the snow and ice, the yearly and annual mowing, and all the maintenance related projects. We have somewhere around 215 to 220 maintenance employees spread out across the 11 turnpikes. that's the staff that I brought with me tonight. I wanted to be able to answer any question that came up to the best that we could and minimize the number that we need to go back and search for additional information for you or any other councilman.
Thank you.
Quickly, I want to go through a very quick history of the Turnpike Authority. Specifically, Mr. O'Leary did a great job about 3 weeks ago presenting to the Norman City Council and trying to explain what we are, who we are, and how we operate. Turnpike Authority was created in Oklahoma in 1947 to construct the Turner Turnpike. You have to picture what that looked like, and you can look up historical road maps on ODOT's website. But in 1946, 1947, there were very few, only a handful of miles, literally 4 or 5 miles in Yukon, handful of miles in Tulsa, that were 4-lane, divided, and paved. And none of those were high speed. So the connection between Oklahoma City and Tulsa, our two major metropolitan areas, was very important at that time. We opened the Turner Turnpike in 1953. In 1954, with that brand new facility, it had restaurants along it. It was really a destination. In 1954, by a vote of the people, we were allowed to cross pledge, which allows us to treat our turnpike network like one turnpike, like one toll road, which enabled us to build the H.E. Bailey, now that portion of I-44, and the Will Rogers Turnpike up on the northeast corner of the state. All of that happened a couple years before Eisenhower signed the interstate bill, which allowed ODOT to go and build the interstate system that we know today, I-40 and I-35 specifically, and then those portions of I-44 that are not tolled. So highlighted a couple things in green here that I want to pay particular attention to. There are only 11 turnpikes in Oklahoma. The Kickapoo that we opened this last year being the 11th. There are 624 approximate road miles, so those are center line miles. We carry anywhere between 3,500 vehicles a day. That's on the Indian Nation Turnpike in southeastern Oklahoma and some of those segments. The Kilpatrick Turnpike here on the north side of the metro in certain areas carries around 70,000 vehicles a day there in and around Quail Springs Mall. Similarly, on the Creek Turnpike over in Tulsa, there are segments there around Jinx that are carrying 70,000 vehicles a day, which is the reason we 6-laned those segments a number of years ago. Legislatively, the legislature authorizes the projects. A lot of those projects were authorized a long time ago. A lot of those legislatively authorized projects are in areas that connected, like for instance, connect Ponca City to Tulsa, Ponca City toward Miami down to the southeastern corner of the state. At the time when those were designated, may have been a need for that traffic to commute from Ponca City to maybe toward Tulsa. Those are not projects that we're anticipating to be working on anytime soon at all at this point. We don't receive absolutely no state appropriations so we don't go to the legislature annually to seek additional funding. We are completely self-supported, utilizing the toll network and the tolls that we collect out in the lanes, whether that's through Pike Pass, through cash, or through our newly enacted plate pay. We are audited yearly by a top 5, as required by our trust indenture, to be audited yearly by a top 5 national firm. This last year, we were audited by BKD. It is not a 3-day audit or a 4-day audit, which some people are used to. This was a 3.5-month audit between the time they came in and them submitting a final report. Secretary Gatz, Director Gatz for the Turnpike Authority serves for a 6-member governor-appointed board, and we are a AA-. We have currently a AA- bond rating. Across the nation, a lot of states are beginning to utilize tolling of some sort. There are 35 current states that have some form of tolling. Texas, our neighbors to the south, have numerous tolling authorities. They're regional. Oklahoma only has one. Kansas only has one. Colorado has a couple different tolling authorities. Those are the nearest to us that we typically are doing some form of work with. OTA, again, receives no state appropriations. We're approximately 40% of the revenue that we collect comes from out-of-state motorists, so it is a benefit to the state of Oklahoma to charge those tolls that we're able to pay for basically all of the maintenance with the toll money collected from the out-of-state motorists. And approximately 38% of the revenue is collected from commercial carriers of some sort. I included this graph that includes the projected sources of revenue for the Turnpike Authority. You'll notice that the bulk of that, the big blue section, is toll revenue. We do have some carryover from a previous year. We maintain some amount of funds within our in the bank in order to be able to pay for anything that might come up. There's some interest income off of that invested money. We also collect some amount of money from the concessions, which are the restaurants and gas stations that are located in a few places throughout our system. This is our projected uses for 2022. We came up with this, and this graph was provided to our board back in December. This includes the debt service payment for the previously constructed projects, our asset preservation plan, which is the money that we spend to maintain and operate our existing facilities. Those were the mill and inlays, the bridge rehabs on the older projects. Not unlike City of Norman, we have some number of projects all the time that are requiring planning and eventually some form of construction. The call center, the customer service center is on there. We fund our own highway patrol, so we fund approximately targeted 130 highway patrol troopers at the Turnpike Authority that provide an added benefit to the state. They don't live on the turnpikes. They operate off the turnpike on their way to and from their own home, which provides added benefit with that added level of troopers in Oklahoma. We have obviously some administration costs. There is a cost to collect. That's the toll operations piece. And then there is a routine road maintenance portion of that. We have a 5-year capital plan. This is a revolving annual plan that includes those bridge rehabs, mill and inlays, surface treatments of any kind, drainage work, safety projects, and any joint ODOT and OTA projects where the OTA or ODOT or even some county and city streets interchange. We utilize that capital plan money, capital plan to schedule and work those projects. Our toll rates are 60% below the national average when you look at passenger vehicles, which is about 90% of our traffic. Our toll rate's about 8 cents a mile in Oklahoma. NTTA's is going to be around 21 cents. Other places in Texas, it exceeds 40 cents. Colorado is pretty high. Kansas is similar to OTA and around the 8 to 12 cents depending on the segment of highway that you're driving on. And again, we're 64% below the national average as it relates to heavy trucks. Recently, and in our recent bond program, I don't know if this is showing up very well for the people that are sitting behind me, but the red sections that are on there are new turnpikes. So that included the John Kilpatrick extension in southwest Oklahoma City, part of that outer loop. The Eastern Oklahoma County Turnpike on the east side, a portion of the outer loop, and then a section of the Gilcrease on the west side of Tulsa, which is a part of the Tulsa outer loop. In addition to those new turnpikes that were built, we also did expansion projects, widening the Turner Turnpike on the east end. About 18 miles will be complete in a couple months. Up on the east end, it'll be all, that portion will be finished. We'll be able to raise the speed limit. It's lit, it's safe, and people are only asking when we're going to finish the rest of it. We did a couple smaller projects, also a pavement rehab and on both the H.E. Bailey and the Muskogee Turnpikes as well. So one of the big things that's been just something that the Turnpike Authority that we're working on continuously is this effort to go cashless. The number one location to have an accident on a turnpike is in a toll zone. We've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 accidents in the last 6 years in toll areas. The effort there, the issue there is that people are slowing down and sometimes coming to a stop in interstate type travel. That's dangerous to come to a stop, even if it is required for us to be able to collect that cash. So we're working diligently to convert additional turnpikes. The John Kilpatrick was done this last summer in 2021. This year we're working on the H.E. Bailey, the Cimarron, which is US 412, a portion of it, Creek, which is State Highway 364, and that we're all working to convert at least portions of this year, and some of that may bleed over into January of next year. So any new access projects, any new construction, any rehab that we do, we'll utilize and convert to plate pay. We're interoperable with all of Texas and Kansas, and we're testing right now with the Southeast Hub, which is down toward Florida and that direction, where eventually your Pike Pass will be able to work down there. We're hoping to have that complete sometime later this year. I want to lead into the Access Oklahoma program and what this program really is. It's a large program. Again, this last bond program was widening a section of the Turner, replacing some pavement and building a few miles in both Oklahoma City and Tulsa of new alignment. This plan is much longer term in order to provide a further down the road look, if you will, into what the Turnpike Authority is going to be working on, what we're going to work on going forward in partnership with ODOT. We're going to widen the rest of the Turner Turnpike between Oklahoma City and Tulsa, so that's that portion of I-44. We'd like to widen 14 miles of the Will Rogers up toward Claremore down on I-44. That portion coming back toward Tulsa's got a lot of congestion and a higher level of accidents in there due to that congestion. We're looking at widening the John Kilpatrick Turnpike from I-40 on the south and west side, or the southwest side of Oklahoma City, around to the northeast side at I-35 due to the extreme growth in traffic volumes that we're seeing annually. We're going to review the extents of the rest of the Turnpike network. Because we were tied to collecting that cash originally, there are locations that we bypassed and didn't provide interchange access, both with state highways and with very rural communities. So we're reviewing lots of locations to see where that needs to be, where we need to go back and add interchanges. And all of those are being afforded to us by the new cashless model that we're going to. And then the last segment here that I know we're going to spend some time on today is to provide an alternate route for the I-35, I-44 congestion that's happening on the south side of Oklahoma City. The contributing factors of that, again, are area of population, the traffic growth, the accident data, and the safety issues that exist, and as well as the travel time reliability. And this really doesn't show up very well on this screen in front of me, but I think on the monitor in front of you, you'll be able to see the blue graphs across the top. Those are census data looking backward from 2020 and projecting forward the exponential growth that is happening in Oklahoma City, Moore, Norman, particularly in Goldsby, much smaller town, and Purcell. And what I tried to correlate here, or what we're trying to correlate here, is that along those south graphs, or along the golden graphs across the bottom of the screen, is the exact same data being shown in traffic data. That's traffic data that ODOT has gathered off of I-35 in this case, and the exponential growth that basically follows the population trends in similar areas. And what those graphs basically show is that over the course of the next 30 years, the traffic on I-35 is going to try to double. It's impossible for the traffic on I-35 to double in its current configuration without being bumper to bumper all day, every day, during probably from 5 to 7 or 8 o'clock at night. More so than it is now. On my way down here today from Oklahoma City, I was stuck in traffic a few different times, came almost to a stop, and then it broke loose once I got down to Norman. And I think over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, you'll see that progressively get worse the further south that you go, to the point that it will bleed over onto area north-south roads, including state highway system and the arterial connections that the cities and counties provide. So just that data in real numbers for the average annual daily traffic, the ADT, for I-35 in particular. Starting at the top, we're looking at State Highway 9, and that the growth rate between 2002 and 2019, and you'll see in a second why we did not count 2020. Traffic volumes were way low in 2020. They bounced back in 2021, but we didn't have finalized and cleaned up data for 2021 to provide for today. Still working on that, but basically the graph holds true that it's growing at 1.4%, which is what we typically use when projecting traffic data forward for I-35. And for any other interstate in Oklahoma, we anticipate a 1.4% growth. You'll notice that as you get closer to I-240, that growth gets to be significantly more, 3%, 2.8%, in some areas 3.9%. That's, of course, all the way up south of I-40. And that we projected this all the way up to the south side of the Turner Turnpike, catching some of that traffic that's just trying to get to and from the Turner Turnpike or to and from the north side of Oklahoma City. Some averages are shown across the bottom, basically showing that I-35 carries a lot of traffic. Put some of that data on into accident. This is accident data that I had pulled that ODOT did for me. The left side two bar charts are I-44. The right side, I think, is where we would like to focus this evening, which is on the growth in accidents that have happened on I-35 just since 2010. And what that number shows there in 2019 is that there are 1,827 accidents in the year of 2019 on I-35, and that is from Purcell to Interstate 40. The other thing that's important to note is that as accidents have gone up, even though driver assist vehicles are getting smarter at braking, the severity of those accidents is going down. And what that tells us is that those accidents are happening in congestion, they're low speed, they're people who are trying to come to a stop, and it becomes some form of usually a fender bender. The one thing that I want to touch on real quick, that 1,827 number, which I think is going to be similar for 2021 when we get the totals. Each one of those accidents, almost every one of them, involved two vehicles. So that's almost 4,000 people that were involved in accidents between Purcell and Interstate 40 in 2019. So what does that mean when you correlate that heavy amount of congestion in the peak period that currently exists certain times of the day on I-35? If you look in the very top left corner of the screen, it says that it takes 87 minutes to get from Purcell to the north end of the Kickapoo Turnpike if you stay on I-35 all the way to the Turner. If we don't do anything, if we don't provide some form of reliever for that, by 2050, just 30 years into the future, that drive turns from an hour and a half into a 2 hour and 10 minute drive. And that 2 hour and 10 minute drive will last for more of the day than it currently does. We correlated that into number of vehicles that were stuck in that traffic and not able to free flow, and calculated a days lost per day, if you will, which is a quality of life issue. It's whether you can be at home with your family or at work being productive. And that goes from 806 days lost every day, which is what I-35 basically has today, to a very large number, 3,763 by 2050. So what we correlated that to is the new alignment, if built and complete by 2035, is just a 35-minute drive. That's estimating the at free flow, the 37 or 38 miles at 80 miles per hour. We did add some additional minutes to that trip. Those are numbers to show that we do anticipate that eventually you'll get stuck behind a couple vehicles that are either trying to pass or not going the speed limit, and eventually there'll be some form of loss in free flow even on a new alignment. the Turnpike Authority cannot have people, because we're charging a premium to drive on the road, we can't have people stuck in traffic. So as soon as we start to see major congestion or it's on the cusp, we start trying to widen those facilities. So with that, I would like to, if I still may, walk quickly through the Access Oklahoma website. This has really been the number one place to get factual data that we have been really being proactive about posting. We're getting lots of questions, so we're trying to answer those questions. Across the top, there's a frequently asked question file where we've posted not only an explanation of how we sell bonds, but also who our bond holders are. I know that's been a question that's come up several places, and so there's a frequently asked question that has some of that information. We're also addressing and updating this website with additional information related to the ongoing questions that we continue to get both through the email group or through the phone calls. We're being as proactive as we can, trying to return those at this point now within 24 hours of receiving a call or an email. Sometimes the information that's requested has been difficult to get, so sometimes there's a little bit of lead time on trying to come up with some of that information. Obviously, where a lot of people are very interested is in this map. Briefly, I want to explain that the yellow dots, if you will, that are all over this map are additional interchange access locations that either the local community has asked for in the past, over the past almost forever, or since the turnpike has been built, or it's a location that we are trying to manage traffic and we have an issue with being able to get emergency vehicles or even people who are stuck in traffic turned around. So most recently, I believe it was this last fall or last summer, on the H.E. Bailey Turnpike, a Newcastle fire truck tried to make a U-turn through one of those emergency cut-throughs, which we don't recommend. They tried to make one, got the truck hung in the crossover, and then were T-boned, and it was a brand new fire truck. We need to add additional safe access points throughout our network to cover, I don't know why it all just disappeared. That was weird. It kind of scared me for a second. We need to add additional safe ingress and egress points throughout our network to minimize the number of places that an emergency vehicle feels the need to use one of those emergency cut-throughs. They're dangerous. The other side of that is we need to provide better access to the communities that we can better serve with cashless tolling. We have not been able to do that in the past. It's not something that I came up with or our current staff came up with. Now we want to do these, and we're just going to be helpful at this point. It's because of that cashless tolling aspect and because of that initiative. The other thing that I want to touch on briefly before we zoom in on the south side of the city is that the all-encompassing I-44 Turner Turnpike widening is captured here. The John Kilpatrick widening is captured here. The flyover direct connects at Hefner Road, Hefner Parkway, State Highway 74, and the John Kilpatrick are captured on here. And as well as some of the projects that are in our list of immediate needs, which include some bridge rehabs, even Hakey Creek Bridge up on the Broken Arrow South Loop. If you've been in that section, or if you've recently in the past drove the John Kilpatrick on the west side, there were some bumpy bridges there that were due for a rehabilitation. We rehabilitated those and made them significantly smoother. The section up on the Creek Turnpike is similar to that and will undergo a similar upgrade and rehabilitation. So what I want to explain, at least if I can, if I can scroll in and zoom in down here. what we're calling the outer loop, and is listed as several different projects in here, is this section on the southwest side of the Will Rogers Airport. This ties into the southwest corner of the John Kilpatrick Turnpike, soon to carry the I-240 designation, so it'll carry an interstate designation. Some of the old studies talked about carrying that connection down toward a location somewhere between Moore and Norman before it proceeded east and then back up north toward the where the Kickapoo Turnpike is now. The connection here, we took the piece out that was between I-44, mainly because of the tremendous amount of development that's happening over here between Newcastle, Tuttle, and Blanchard. So we thought better to serve those folks would be to provide an additional river crossing that crosses from off the end of State Highway 37 east toward Moore and Norman along the Indian Hills Road section. Do we know why the map keeps disappearing? So what I was hoping to be able to zoom in on this and show, and maybe it's going to show back up as I zoom in. There we go. This is a full directional interchange over here at Newcastle. Proceeding east, it's a new river crossing across the South Canadian. When we get over here to Western, on the west side of I-35, this section, what we anticipated would be asked for or would be requested is that Indian Hills Road would be maintained as a one-way frontage road. So a frontage road on both sides being one way. Interchanges here would be at Western, and then again another one down a little bit closer to Santa Fe, tying in and before the I-35 corridor, the I-35 connection, which is also a full directional interchange. So you'll be able to go all the different directions at the time when we complete this. Indian Hills Road here is on, has a westbound 2-lane and has an eastbound 2-lane. These are grade separate. It's a grade separated over the BNSF Railway just east of I-35. We assumed that once we went east of I-35, the best location to take this would be further to the south. At the time we looked at this, and we've looked at a few different alternatives here, trying to take it a quarter mile south, trying to take it a half mile south. All of those because of Little River that runs parallel basically to Indian Hills Road, about a half mile to a mile south of Indian Hills. Posed a major issue for working within basically a wetland the entire length. So ultimately the best location was to move that back up to and along the Indian Hills Road corridor. Indian Hills Road in this section and in the section west of I-35 would be rebuilt to brand new standard within its existing footprint. We don't intend to cross over Indian Hills Road at any location to, for instance, into the Belmar Golf Course or into any of these neighborhoods. I'm going to go back because I missed one. This neighborhood that's on the south side of Indian Hills, I know there's a study area orange coloring that goes into that neighborhood. We have no intention of purchasing right away along that south side. We want to hold Indian Hills Road on its current alignment. At least that's what we anticipated at this time. Proceeding east, we maintain those one-way frontage roads on each side with additional interchanges at 12th, which is sooner, one that's over here at Broadway or near Broadway, and then one that's on the far east end, which is at Douglas Boulevard or 48th Street. One option, and we anticipate visiting at some point with City of Norman about, is the one-way frontage roads, whether that's something that's desirable or not, and also whether the city would like the opportunity to extend those one-way frontage roads as far as we can further to the east, and maybe it's not. At this location, I'll stop for a second and explain what you see on the map. The blue line is the center line of the main line 4 lanes. So it's basically the ditch, if you will, between the 2 main lines. If you picture, if you've driven the Kickapoo at any given, in recent times, the typical section through this location would look just like that. That orange or yellow corridor study area that we're showing there is about 1,200 feet wide. It's 600 feet each side of the blue line. If you look at the Kickapoo Turnpike, there is nowhere we're wider than about 600 feet, and that's in a major cut section with some big back slopes. We really think that most of the Kickapoo, it fits within about 200 to 600 feet. So this big swath that we're showing on here that I know lots of people have calculated and gone out and looked at the number of homes, the number of vertical structures, the number of barns and shops and things that are within that area, and said that those are the ones that are going to be impacted because we're going this wide. We have absolutely no intent of a 1,200 foot wide swath anyplace. So this will get narrowed down significantly. That's the reason that we started doing some survey work. I know I saw we're doing aerial survey. We're trying to get enough information in order to be able to tie this down to something that we really believe to be what the alignment maybe could be.
Even if they're not in the orange, you're still going to have a turnpike in their front yard, correct?
That will depend on the location. It would depend
Backyard?
on, I'm sorry.
Backyard, maybe?
Well, it would depend on a lot of different things, depending on the impact to that piece of property. Through our negotiation process, that's another thing we've been pressed on. Can you give us an estimate of the number of homes? And we have said we can't possibly give an estimate when we don't know what the alignment is exactly. We think we're going to be in this study area with someplace.
All right, this is for council to talk. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to, we can't possibly know what that number is. The other thing that would be bad for us to estimate is that sometimes through the negotiation process, a property that may be impacted to the vacant portion of the property can somehow through the negotiations end up being a total take if that's what the property owner wants. That happens from time to time. And on the Kickapoo, we didn't know the exact number of homes that were impacted until all the right-of-way had been acquired. So it's really difficult to come up with an estimate. To your point, Mayor, there are going to be people who will have, that currently don't have a turnpike as a neighbor, and we will become a new neighbor. And we understand that. We try, and all of us, I think, everybody that's in here was involved in the last expansion program. Mr. Gore that's sitting over here beside me can explain all of the right-of-way nuances. Every single parcel is unique. Every single family member is unique. It's the most serious thing that we do, both at ODOT, Mr. Taylor, and at the Turnpike Authority. It's the most serious thing we do. We go out and purchase property from people who did not have a for sale sign. Okay, and we totally understand that. And we try to be as conscious about it as we possibly can in establishing that fair market value. I'll let Mr. Gore speak to that in just a few minutes. But to your point, yes, there will be people who today don't have a turnpike as a neighbor, and will have a turnpike either as a neighbor, whether it's on their property they used to own, or a neighboring property, or maybe two houses down. I mean, all those things are possibilities when looking at these alignments.
Well, I want us to continue so we can get to the questions, but
Yes.
with all due respect, it's more than just property owners. Especially the east, loop will completely change the character of our city, not just one property owner or 100 property owners. I think that's something that you can't ever give back to Norman.
Yes, I understand.
Okay, please continue.
Thank you. Proceeding further east, and before I leave this, and I know I'm going to forget it, so I'm going to plant a seed so that somebody can remind me. I want to go back through a priority list of these projects before I get to the questions. This is a rather large interchange. We placed this out here, or we anticipated placing it in a very a wooded area that's owned by I think a paper mill or a paper or plywood company. I thought that'd be a good location for what will end up being a pretty wide piece of of real estate. We anticipated an interchange at Choctaw Road because ODOT on I-40 has an interchange at Choctaw Road. We anticipated an interchange at Peebly Road, and this takes us back up to the south end of the Kickapoo where several ramps that don't currently exist today would need to be built to provide full access. Going back to what we are calling the south extension that starts right here off of this, the loop piece and proceeds south. These are realignments of the existing city street because we're crossing at an intersection. We wouldn't put an interchange under a bridge in that location, or if the county road is over, those are just guesses at this point until we've got that survey data. Proceeding south and west, the next interchange is down at Alameda that we anticipated being the main access, one of the main accesses to and from the lake and also to and from downtown Norman. An interchange at an obvious location, State Highway 9, an additional one that's down here at Etowah Road on the east side of Noble, and then an additional interchange that's at State Highway 77, but just north of Slaughterville and south of Noble, and then south and west across the South Canadian River, across the BNSF Railway again in another location, to a full directional interchange. We've probably got some work to do on exactly what this looks like, but it's a loop ramp that facilitates southbound to eastbound, and then a flyover bridge that connects southbound to southbound and northbound to northeastbound at this location. I didn't forget, so I'll really quickly tell you what our priority list and looking at this very long-range plan is. I-44 over in the Tri-City area is carrying somewhere getting close to 50,000 vehicles a day. This information is available on ODOT's website. I-35 there south of Moore is nearing, if not exceeding, 100,000 vehicles a day. You have to remember that the average daily traffic is averaging in Sundays, which are typically in Oklahoma the least traveled days. But that also averages in football traffic for both OU and other university home games. So as a priority for our priority list, the first priority would be to get this section connected between I-44 over to I-35. That doesn't mean that the full interchange at I-35 would be complete at the time we would open it, but it would be, you'd be able to get on and off the turnpike, on and off of Indian Hills Road on that west side. The next priority would be to get this segment done on the east side that connects back to the south end of the Kickapoo. That's a major project, a very long project with lots of service road as it's currently drawn today. And then third priority would be this section on the southwest side of the Will Rogers Airport. Fourth priority, again in a 15-year long-range plan, is this section from the Indian Hills Road corridor down south to Highway 9, and then as a fifth priority to get from Highway 9 down to I-35. Understanding that there are many environmental impacts on this section on the west side of Lake Thunderbird, and understanding that it might provide us the additional time we need to conduct those additional studies that may be warranted in that area prior to us beginning or doing any construction in that area or final establishment of an alignment. So when you look at the way the Turnpike Authority announced the Driving Forward program for the Kickapoo, at the very first announcement, a board was shown. We didn't do it digitally at that time, but a board was shown, and a 2-mile wide colored section was shown from I-44 down to I-40. And thousands and thousands of people fell underneath that corridor when in fact the engineers that were working on the project had a pretty good idea of where it was not going to go. We knew we weren't going to go through a cemetery. We knew we weren't going to go through neighborhood after neighborhood in a row. And we knew that the corridor was going to be significantly more narrow than that. A few months ago, when this was discussed with our authority board in December for the very first time publicly, we talked about how are we going to show this and can we narrow this up so that it is less impactful and hopefully causes less anxiety on the people that are in the community than we did the last time, trying to learn from our mistakes. So fast forward to February 22nd, the alignments that you see on here now have marinated, I guess, for a month. We are 1 month into a 15-year long-range plan. I continue to hear people say, I wish you'd have come to us 10 or 15 years ago, and that's really what we're trying to do, is to come and work through this project hand in hand in an area that we understand to be sensitive. We understand that it wasn't the plan, and we understand that we weren't asked to come for this both south extension in the east-west portion. The goal that I have is that at some point we're able to work with the city manager's office, with the public works director and the city engineers for Norman to communicate back and forth with the city council and address concerns in real time as this project is developed, however it moves forward and however fast we're able to move forward. What we've done in the past is a small segment. This is 4 or 5 of the last programs. And if we'd done it like we did last time, we'd have showed a huge corridor and we'd have only done a little piece of this. And then 5 or 6 years from now, we'd come back and, hey, here we come again with another segment. And it'd have been probably in this priority list that I'm trying to show. And eventually we'd have shown up with this segment that's north-south, and it could have been some years from now. What we are trying to do is provide a long-range look at what Oklahoma needs to solve a major issue that's occurring on I-35 and that we know is going to grow on the west side of Norman along I-35. We want to relieve some of that congestion. The traffic is going to double. That's going to happen. We don't think that half that traffic is going to pull off and take the turnpike, but some of it can. And if we can take and relieve some of that congestion that occurs on the interstate, it will better facilitate the Norman residents that do make that commute every day back and forth to Oklahoma City and are stuck in that congestion. We really think that this is the best solution to that travel time problem for Norman. And I think with that, I think I've covered all the bullet points that I had in my head, and would stand to answer any questions that you or the city council may have, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lynn.
Excuse me. Is there any prohibition on board members, their family members, or an LLC that they might be involved in purchasing land in these areas as projected out?
So the question is, if there's somebody who is on the board?
The board, their family members, employees, their family members,
Our employees.
or if they own an LLC, prohibited from buying land where these projections are going.
Okay. Mr. Gore, would you mind answering that?
Ma'am.
Nothing that would prevent anybody from going out and buying land that's in this area. They bought it before OTA got there. They still could do that. And then when OTA was ready to purchase it for the project, we'd approach that landowner at that time, whoever that would be, to acquire that property.
What if they're buying land around it that would be used later for commercial development?
That would be between the current landowners and the future landowners.
Do you see any problem with that? That maybe some inside baseball, some almost insider trading, that some people in the good old boy system might be hooked up and out purchasing land? Do you have any idea if that's happened yet or not?
I'm unaware of that happening anyplace.
Yeah, none that I know of.
None that you know of. So if we go look at land records, and if any of those people are on the board or their family members are an LLC, because it's easy to go through and do that kind of stuff. That would seem almost criminal to me.
I'm unaware of anybody that is on our board, their family members, or an LLC purchasing any property, and I'd be interested if you have evidence of that to bring that before us. That's something we would definitely want to look into.
And what would happen if you looked into it and found it?
I don't know the answer to that. That'd be the first time that had come up. We have had to purchase property from both at This has happened at ODOT and at OTA with approximately 2,700 employees between the two entities, that we've had to purchase property from an employee or somebody that was a member of the board or the Transportation Commission. When that happens, we typically have taken it through condemnation, correct? And so the court decides the value of the property, so there's no favoritism shown by somebody who's working directly for us.
Well, just to me, I mean, we already have roads that were taxed on to the hilt that are still just some of the worst roads in America. Then we're gonna have to pay to use these roads. Somebody's making money on it. The whole process just seems gross when you're gonna change our whole landscape of our city. I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm just not a big fan of any of this process.
I do understand, sir, and I hope that through this process, we're able to show you how it works and provide you with information that you are looking for going forward. Again, trying to open up the lines of communication from our staff with Norman staff so that we can facilitate providing answers to the questions that you may have. And I am happy to sit down and visit with you outside of a city council meeting if you'd like about any concerns that you have, whether it be the active project, a property owner, or otherwise.
Thank you.
Speaking of staff, were mayors and city managers of other impacted communities contacted or notified before a week before February 22nd?
So the answer to that is yes. There were certain staff at certain, both local government, whether that be county commissioner in nature or city staff, were apprised in a very high level, at a very high level, of nothing like what you're seeing necessarily on the screen right now, but at a very high level, we talked about a program, and specifically a couple years ago, I think we started that program in 2020. We started a study to look at additional interchanges on the Indian Nation Turnpike. Last summer, I was called to the Capitol for an interim study for additional access points on the Indian Nation Turnpike. Through each of those, the answer that I gave last summer to everybody that we talked about is, in order for us to facilitate a major investment like this even in a small community, we can't afford it within our capital plan. I don't think I did a good job of making that point earlier. Our normal capital plan is just for our routine maintenance. So when we want to build something new, it takes additional funds. And the only way that would be possible is through a future bond program. When we got to December 7th, the people who some reached out and asked us if their project, quote unquote, was going to be a part of if their project was going to be a part of a bond program as it was described to our board back in December. And so the answer is yes. We met with some between December 7th and February. Immediately after February 22nd, it was almost daily, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, meeting with some other local governments and city leaders, city managers, city engineers.
So why weren't you more proactive in reaching out to the community that defeated an outer loop in 1999?
I can appreciate that question in that, it could be a mistake that we made. I don't know that we knew exactly, the impact or how Norman was going to react at the time. Putting in a 10 additional miles of one-way frontage roads along Indian Hills Road, I didn't see a bad side to that at the time when it was drawn. I didn't see a downside. I saw lots of positives for that alignment. The South Connection is a major connection that's going to be a major freight movement, pulling some freight off of I-35 for the freight that's trying to go north and east. or trying to go east, it'll provide a bypass for some of them, a place for them to get off of I-35. Every single truck we can remove is like taking 10 cars off because of how slow they are to get back to speed and things. So probably could have done a better job. I know that I'm eager to have meetings with you, Mayor, now, if you would like, whenever we can get our calendars to line up.
I'm sure we'll be chatting a lot.
Okay, good.
But I mentioned that because you wanted to improve the process, and we were all caught wildly off guard and didn't have answers for residents that were coming to us traumatized. And I appreciate, this is where it's 1,200 feet instead of it's actually going to be 600 feet. But for us, that just means you traumatize twice as many people. And so for future communities that have to be terrified of losing, retirement homes, dream homes, family homes, I would recommend getting that public input before, at least apprising us so we can do a better job of communicating with our residents, especially Councilmember Tortorello. I mean, I can't even imagine the phone calls you started receiving. So, I think that's very, very important going forward, and Oklahomans deserve that. Thank you. Councilmember Schuler.
I'm going to be real honest. I've got a lot of questions. And then after your presentation, I have a bunch more. So I'll ask several, and then I'll let my fellow council members get to some, and then I'll get back in the queue. But kind of following up with kind of Mayor Clark's line of questioning about why we weren't, informed earlier in the process so that we could have understood that this was coming. Can you lay out a timeline of events for us of where this started? I mean, because we talked about when this was first publicly talked about, which was in December, but can you back up from there and tell us, like, when did this become an idea? When was this first kind of circling and starting to be talked about?
Sure, I can do my best. I don't have a timeline in front of me, so a little disclaimer. But all of us that both represent OTA and ODOT, we are always looking at the issues that exist and a solution that we can provide sometime in the future. The Turnpike Authority is a tool in that tool belt for transportation in Oklahoma, in that when we can do something, we can usually move quickly because we have a different set of funding. ODOT has to develop plans well in advance. That's a requirement to utilize some of the federal funds that they utilize. Ours, once we make it public, to Councilmember Lynn's question earlier, once we make it public, people run out and can try to buy up property ahead of a turnpike. This happens in other states as well. So it didn't become public, at least as an idea, in front of our board until December 7th, 2021. It wasn't shown on this map until February 22nd of this year, 2022. Not long after Secretary Gatz became secretary in the cabinet, months later, 6 to 8 months, I'm going to guess, he came to me and said the governor's interested in a bold vision for Oklahoma in transportation. He came to me with that, more than a year ago, probably. Prior to working at the Turnpike Authority, I've been here 5 years at OTA. Prior to that, about 15 years at ODOT. I was an EIT, engineering training with ODOT, and spent most of my time working in Perry, which is District 4 now, was called Division 4 then. District 4, which includes Oklahoma and Canadian counties, and basically 2 counties wide, all the way to Kansas. While I was in District 4 and working for ODOT, all the time we were looking at what do we need to do to resolve issues, whatever that issue was. short story. I'll try to keep it short. But while I was between houses.
I mean, we've got a lot of questions.
Okay, I'll try to go fast. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, I mean,
I'll go quicker.
I just don't want you to be here forever.
Okay. We will stay here until all the questions have been answered,
Okay.
best that I can, or until you ask me to leave.
Okay.
Well, I was staying I ended up staying in Moore for a time and working, while I worked, my office was in Perry. During that time, while I was making that drive for just 2 weeks, identified the issues that were occurring at the I-35, I-40, and I-235 interchange, where there is a one-lane ramp that went northbound to eastbound I-40, and the same thing in the reverse direction, westbound I-40 to southbound I-35. And over the course of that week, I thought we could fit another lane and get another lane on these ramps that would resolve that bottleneck in that location. And just due to changing my driving habits for a couple of weeks, that project was added to the 8-year construction work plan, fast-tracked because it didn't need right-of-way relocation or utilities, right-of-way acquisition or utility relocation. And so all the time, we were looking at an issue that exists in transportation in Oklahoma and a solution. I'm going to say that this east-west connection and the connection down to Purcell has been something that's been at least on my mind for a number of years, 6 or 7 years before I ever went to the Turnpike Authority. I knew there needed to be a reliever route for I-35. Traffic projections that continue to grow on I-35 exceed what they were 20 years ago, what we thought they were going to be. That is not a result necessarily of just Norman or just one of these other towns. It's a result of the entire group and the freight that's coming out of Texas. TxDOT is landing 8 lanes, 4 lanes each direction into Oklahoma on I-35. They're working on it right now. And so they know that there's major traffic headed this direction. We're trying to do what we can in the Oklahoma City area to prepare for that. We drew some lines late last summer, what I would call a sophisticated Crayola drawing. They did not have a horizontal curve. No civil engineering had been applied to come up with an idea. Most of that work has been done between December 7th and February 22nd. And what you see on the map in front of you is a sophisticated map, sophisticated Crayola drawing, if you will, because none of those studies have been done that we need to do in order to finalize the actual alignments.
Okay, so I think my point with asking the question is that this has been thought about in the minds of the OTA, other entities for quite a long time, but there were certain key individuals that were not brought along for that conversation, i.e. the cities and towns that are going to be impacted with these road construction projects. And Mayor talked about this last week, but why was ACOG, why did that get taken out of their long range plan? It was there, it disappeared for the last several plans. We as a city in '99 said, no, we defeated it then. Has been lots of talk about where is this route going to be. And so, without these impact studies, environmental, engineering, surveying, all of that kind of stuff, how did we get to this? How do we get to these lines on this map?
So basically, I don't want to re-ask your question, but I'm going to,
Sure.
if it's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking how did these alignments get selected?
Correct.
So the alignments that are shown on this map, the east-west connection that ties into Highway 37 and along Indian Hills Road, that's really the only place left that we can get through that doesn't impact major businesses on that section. Connecting back to the Kickapoo makes sense. We tried to go out to that large vacant property that's a plywood property or something that's got trees on it. We tried to get out to there before we knew we'd need some form of interchange. Highway routes that are being designed for 70 or 75 miles per hour are very straight, and the footprint varies based on the terrain. So they need to be straight and flat. They want to be straight and flat. Oh, I'm sorry. The civil engineering will solve for that. The alignment that went back to the Kickapoo, we chose an alignment that would meet those design speeds horizontally for the curves and impacted the absolute least number of homes that we could see utilizing Google Earth, and this is an ArcGIS, but utilizing satellite imagery. The alignment that heads south is again straight, and it's a result of that speed and the engineering that's going to have to go into that. It's not a boulevard that can be designed to have lots of curves. So unfortunately, we're trying very hard, and I think when we get the engineering, the survey information, and we get all that aligned, I think that the impact to homes is going to be tremendously reduced as far as homes that are in the way of the construction along this alignment. If we go east of the lake, and I know this is going to be a question that somebody is going to ask, if we go east of the lake, it adds 12.5 miles to the length. It's a tremendous cost, obviously, first of all. Second of all, it becomes a less desirable route. It no longer serves the metro area of Norman. Granted, may not want it to, the council may not want it to serve the metro area of Norman. But it also impacts 12.5 more miles of property. Now, I don't know the number of homes that are underneath that will end up being actually impacted in the current alignment. But I know that if we make it 12.5 miles longer to connect the same exact 2 points, that it adds to the probability that will impact at least additional property owners, whether that's farms or additional homes. So that's how we ended up with the alignment that's shown. There could be something through our study process. I mean, I have to say this. We established a line that we think we can stay within, whether it's missing something that's relatively small. But if there's something that's completely in the way, we could have to realign to another location, whether that's west or east, a few 100 feet, a quarter mile. I mean, it's possible. I just want to say that it is possible. We will know so much more 5 or 6 months from now that we just don't know today. And as soon as I have that information, I'm more than happy to come back and try to explain exactly the reason that we chose the alignment that we either end up with or wherever we end up taking this.
So just to summarize, right now, this alignment is based on time, right? And it being the straightest route. And
It's based on,
the time from point A to point B, trying to get the straightest
I see.
route, right? And the least number of miles. So to impact traffic times, essentially.
travel time is what
Travel,
you're
yeah.
referring to. You know, that's a pretty good way of putting it. Aside from that, there are a lot more factors that factor into that time.
I mean, I understand that. I'm just saying that if we kind of boil it down to, without having any more of the studies about environment, you know, the actual topography, what you can't see just from, you know, Google Earth or a plane or whatever, that's what we get with this alignment currently. So we're not talking about how many parcels are impacted. We're not talking about how many people. We're not talking about how many buildings, how many like homes, how many outbuildings, how many businesses. None of those things are taken into consideration.
I'm sorry that I did not understand the question prior. I do understand it, I think now. This line could have been drawn east or west of its current alignment. The reason that north-south segment, and I want to make sure that everybody understands, this piece that I'm pointing on the screen at, the reason that is there is that if you go east just a little ways, you get into floodplain. If you go west, you get into additional neighborhoods. We wanted to utilize that green space on the north end for the interchange that was the least impactful to homes. And then we chose a line, the north-south segment, that is the least impactful to homes.
Okay, so that section for the interchange is, as you put it, just a bunch of trees, but trees are really important, and I would also venture to say that Norman really cares about trees and our environment. And what trees do is filter our air. What trees do in that section is, ground our groundwater, filter our water to our lake. So how many trees are you proposing to take out in that section? All of them? Some of them?
We only clear typically the property that we need in order to build the facility. There are multiple locations throughout our network where we leave as many trees as we can. And in fact, we've gone back in a lot of locations and planted additional trees and joined, especially in the Tulsa area, with the not-for-profit group Up With Trees. We've partnered with them to install and build additional to plant and maintain additional trees throughout our right-of-way. I have no idea how many trees there are on that piece of property, though.
Sure, I didn't figure you could answer that question directly. Just saying that, there's always an impact. So saying something is, oh, we want to get there because it's just X, Y, and Z doesn't necessarily mean that that's not going to have an impact for, our community or our local environment. So talking a little bit more about the studies, where are you currently with that? Has that started? Are you currently in the process of your environmental studies? Other impact studies?
The progress that's been made on this program is that at our January board meeting, we began an agreement with Poe and Associates to be program manager. Representing them as David Stribb, sitting over my shoulder. In February, we hired some right-of-way acquisition consultants. That's not for this section in particular right now. What we're focused on is on the Turner Turnpike, any additional right-of-way we need on some of these other corridors, some of these interchange projects. We needed to get a contract in place for them. This last week, we ordered the survey. The aerial survey had to be done this fast because it is impacted by the spring green up. So as trees gain leaves, the survey becomes less accurate. And then we would have to go out and actually do field survey. I did not want any of our surveyors going on people's property at this stage in this process to do survey work. I wanted to make sure that we remained as respectful as we could. So we did aerial survey. It was done this last weekend, as somebody I think pointed out.
Are those the markings that that the public has been seeing on roadways?
There
Like the chevrons and
Yeah,
different
I
things?
saw a picture. It's a chevron that's something about this size. Those are, as I understand it, ground truthing marks so that as they fly, they're able to take a physical survey shot at those locations. And then as they fly at it with a LiDAR airplane, they are able to tie those to a true survey point. So in the process of this program, that's where we've gotten to. That information will be disseminated to some of the design engineers, and then Ms. McCullough would probably be able to explain better where we are exactly in the environmental process.
I don't think that microphone is on.
No, here, you can come up here.
Or you can turn it on.
So to your question about the environmental studies, where we are in our process now, like Joe alluded to, is I work for Garver. We're part of the program management team, and we're going to be responsible for overseeing the environmental studies for the entire program. We are very early in our process, and we are right now planning our work, figuring out what help we're going to need, what specialists we're going to need to do the studies that we need to do, what corridor do we need to study. Joe pointed out the 1,200-foot corridor, that's probably close to what we will end up studying, even though we know the corridor, the footprint of the roadway will be much smaller. We're going to study that footprint so that we know we have the information about what's out there. And that way, if the alignment does need to move, then we know what the impacts are going to be. So that work is going to start probably in the next month or so. We're going to have teams of folks out in the field on the ground, and we will be notifying all the owners that we would like to enter their property so that we can look for the environmental resources that are out there. We'll have archaeologists, we'll have biologists, and they will be in teams identifying things like waters and wetlands. We'll be looking for archaeological sites and historic sites. We'll be identifying really anything that we think is a potential constraint that we need to take into account when we're looking at the alignments and where they're going to end up being. So that's going to start in about a month. We think it's going to take us probably the good part of a year to cover the entire program. Joe mentioned that the sort of the priority that of projects, and so our studies will probably follow that same priority so that we have the information as early as we can to provide to the engineers and make sure they have all the information about where the alignments are going to be.
Will the city have access to those final reports on environmental studies,
Yes.
specifically for the sections that are related to Norman?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So how, in a timely manner? So when will those, as the sections are completed, or are we going to have to wait a full year for the full program to be completed?
I don't see any reason that you would need to wait. I mean, the only caveat that I would put on that is some of that information, particularly related to archaeological sites, is protected information. We don't want that being broadcast, but certainly for the council's use, I think as soon as that information is known, I don't see why we couldn't share it.
Okay. And who do we contact to get that information?
I guess that would be me, or
Hopefully, we're working through that, whoever the city assigns to work on that project.
To the mic so that they can hear you.
I'm sorry. Hopefully, we're working through whoever the city assigns to work with us on this project. We'll invite them to the meetings, and then we'll address those concerns and those requests. As she stated, there will be some redacted information. Again, some of it being somewhat sensitive, whether it's tribal or there are all kinds of reasons that it could be sensitive information. So we don't provide any personal property information. We will tell you what we found, but sometimes we can't necessarily exactly tell you where. Right.
And then what entities will you have to work with for that process? So Bureau of Reclamation, Oklahoma Department of Wildlife, like what is the full scope of all the different agencies and entities?
So the entities that will be consulted are many of those that you mentioned. The first step is the Turnpike will contact kind of a huge list, kind of everyone you can think of, and ask for input. Say, we're doing this program, we'd like to understand what your concerns are, please contact us, let us know. And so that would go to all of the state, federal, and local agencies that have any oversight over land or resources within anywhere in the program. Now, we know that some of those agencies are going to definitely have more input and more concerns than others. We will be getting permits from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers across the program. And so we anticipate, in fact, we've already met with them and will continue to meet with them to make sure that the information that we're collecting is the right information for them to be able to issue the permits that the Turnpike will need, and at the right scale and the right level of detail. Other agencies will certainly be U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They have jurisdiction, of course, over threatened and endangered species and their habitat. The State Historic Preservation Officer will be another important agency. We understand that around Lake Thunderbird, we could potentially be interacting with the Bureau of Reclamation, given that they're the property owner at Lake Thunderbird. Of course, the Conservancy District, the park, all of the entities that have an interest in that property or any property across the program will all be consulted, requested input from, and then, you know, really environmental is a process. It's about understanding the environment, what the project may or may not do to that environment, and then talking to the right people to figure out, okay, how do we best avoid or minimize impacts?
Thank you.
Sure.
So we know that it's going to take about a year for the full program to get assessed for the environmental studies. So how are there overlapping timelines for this project? So, you know, right-of-way access, other types of contractors, consultants that are going to be kind of parallel to this? And why are you operating in a parallel if we don't know yet what's happening with the environmental studies?
Yeah, would you speak to the
Like, how can that happen?
studies and that we've got, you know, about how some of them can be done relatively quickly, and then some of them are the more of mitigation that we'll need to do through part of the design.
Okay. I'm sorry, could you just repeat so I understand?
Sure. So there are kind of multiple timelines that are going on here.
Sure.
So you're conducting environmental studies, and that's going to take a year. But other parts of the project are continuing to move forward
Right.
without understanding the full scope of what you would need to mitigate
Right.
in terms of something coming back for an environmental, you know, point, especially around that we're worried about, you know, our watershed, Lake Thunderbird, the aquifer, you know, our wells coming offline. There's kind of a slew of things that are of concern to us as a city. And I would say not just the South Extension, but also the east-west connection because of Little River, which is a filtration zone for Lake Thunderbird, which is our drinking water. And so I think for both of those sections, it's, you know, we've been giving a lot of attention to the South Extension, but I want to make sure that we're talking about both of this. We're talking about all of this together.
Yeah.
So, sorry, to circle back.
Okay.
How can we operate in multiple kind of routes at the same time without having a full understanding of the environmental impacts?
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So the design, like Joe mentioned, the survey and our environmental process are going to be ongoing concurrently, and we're going to work really collaboratively as a team so that the designers understand the information that we're collecting and we understand the sort of the goals and the thoughts behind their process. And we do have environmental information available now. It's high-level review. It's not field-based. So we have information that's publicly available for the most part on where things like rivers and streams and wetlands and archaeological sites and those things are that we know about. So that's a starting point for us. Things like cemeteries, we know, those are things we're going to avoid. We know that. There are other things that we know, well, we'd like to avoid if we can, but let's understand, kind of the full scope of what we're looking at. So the design will move forward. It doesn't move so fast that we can't provide information along the way. They're going to be looking at alignments, looking at topography, and I'm not an engineer, but they look at those things while we're gathering information, and we just share it as we move forward. So no final decisions are made until all of that information is collected.
Okay. So can you, I think it's
Sure.
not environmental. I'm going to ask some questions about right-of-way acquisition in kind of this parallel universe that we're working on, these parallel timelines. So are those going to start before environmental studies are fully completed? What is the timeline of that process?
So for the whole program, like Joe said, we've started entering into contract with right-of-way agents to secure property. And I think this covers the whole system. You know, so those agents will be utilized on the Turner, utilized up Will Rogers, utilized where needed. In this area particularly, once we get far enough in design, which will be based off designers and based off environmental studies, when that point gets to a point that we're confident enough in the right-of-way, it has been established and safely established, at that point is when we'll start the right-of-way negotiations and start approaching landowners directly.
Is there a specific percentage of design that needs to be completed before you start right-of-way acquisition?
Before we start approaching landowners, it's typically around 60% design planned before we start approaching them. We have had people approach us asking on total takes. Once that we know, we can see on the alignments that, hey, the blue line, no matter where we shift, it's a total take. And to help at the landowner's request, when we get to a point far enough along that we're confident that it is going to be a total take, we would, at the landowner's request, start that acquisition process with them.
And at 60% of the design plan completed, how much of the environmental impact studies will have been also completed?
I don't know the schedule exactly, and I think it varies from corridor to corridor when those 60% design plans will be done. It's not like the whole program's being designed simultaneously. Our environmental work will all be done up front. So some of the corridors that are top of the list, we're going to focus on first so that we have that information. But at 60%, I would imagine that we are going to have the information all collected, whether or not all the consultations and back and forth with all the agencies have been done at that point, I'm not sure. But I think we're going to have the information so that the designers know where the constraints are.
Okay. You understand my concern is that you're going to start right-of-way acquisition and, we're going to be at 60% of the design, and then we might potentially not have an environmental impact study to look at yet. And so you're going to be reaching out to our property owners in Norman, and we haven't yet seen studies. That's a concern that I have, that I would think that my fellow council members would also have.
Understood.
Is that a no? Is that a yes? Will we not have them? Is that a question that you can answer now?
I think we can provide them as soon as they're complete, right? Or as soon as we're.
Right, as soon as they're complete. So I would say, yes, you will have that information at
Before you
60%.
start right-of-way acquisition?
In most cases, I would think so.
I would think that's true, yes.
Okay, so that's a soft.
I mean, I'm not trying to dodge your question. I just
understand.
honestly don't know exactly when all of these things are going to fall in
There are lots
place.
of parcels. There'll be a time somewhere between now and the 60% plan phase that Todd was mentioning, where we'll know what the alignment's gonna be. We'll double check that there's not one of the environmental issues that would stop that alignment. And at that time, we'd be, able to move forward with total takes if there was a willing seller, if somebody was approaching us, which is what he was alluding to. We're not going out and actively purchasing any property in an alignment that we don't think we can build on. So if there's something that exists someplace, and those are the first things, the stuff that causes a no-go. So there's stuff we can have to avoid, there's stuff we can mitigate for. If there is something we have to avoid, those are the first things that we will do to establish that alignment.
Okay. I still have more questions, but I'm gonna cede time to other council members. I know they've got lots of questions as well, and they'll probably cover some of mine. But you can see that this is still really concerning in terms of the timeline. How do we plan as a city for our master plans, for our transportation plan, our land use plan, stormwater master plan, all of these things when there are simultaneous timelines? We don't know when residents are going to, get approached for right-of-way acquisition, whether it's going to be a total taking, whether it's going to be a partial property, where the exact alignment of these roads are going to be, when we're going to get the environmental impact studies completed. It's all very squishy, and that's something that is really concerning for us as leaders in our community, and trying to work with our residents and to assure them that we're going to take all of the steps that we need to mitigate all of these impacts. You're not providing me with any kind of good feelings about the process moving forward. So I'll say that and then let everybody else.
Thank you. And each council member, I've got my sheet of questions as well, so I like that strategy. Let's try to limit it to a few at a time, and if for some reason your button doesn't re-click, just flag me down. Councilmember Studley.
Okay. I feel like I've got a lot of comments more than I do questions. I definitely feel like you guys put the cart before the horse, and in your own admission, this is just a crayon drawing. You chose a route with a crayon and motive, and now you're scrambling to show how it could be the best route, and that's not how engineering works. You're reverse engineering this to fit your need. Right before this meeting, you guys were at a meeting, I'm assuming you all were there, and Dr. Amy Soretto, apologize if I misspoke or mispronounced her name, but she had a lot of good information that she shared with you guys, and I hope that you really listened to that and took it to heart. One of the things that she mentioned that I thought was interesting was that all of the traffic studies that you guys have presented to the public in the past about why these routes are needed, that only 65% of your estimated traffic has actually come to fruition. So another 35% is way off base, and you guys don't have that amount of traffic on your current turnpikes. You kept touting and boasting a few times about how no state appropriations are made to you guys, and why would you need it when you can take the land as you want and do what you want with it. You had mentioned about this route going from Purcell to I-40, and you did a study. It was 87 minutes, is that right? Or what was the 87 minutes to go from Purcell to where?
The route from the 87 minutes that was on that slide is utilizing I-35 during peak period today between Purcell and the north end of the Kickapoo, if you were headed north and east toward Tulsa, capturing the congestion that occurs both on I-35 between Purcell and I-240 and 240 up to 40, and then that segment from 40 all the way back up to I-44, the Turner Turnpike.
Okay. And so with the 87 minutes from Purcell to that area, you also had mentioned that Norman would be benefiting from this turnpike, and it would solve traffic issues in Norman. I don't see how driving from Purcell to up there with an 87-minute study is showing any kind of traffic issues solving in Norman. And I don't see anyone in the center of Norman driving all the way out east to catch a turnpike to go to Oklahoma City. That is not going to happen, because that would put way more time on anyone's route. Let's see. You had mentioned that this wasn't going through any burial grounds, and I wanted to mention that there are Native Americans with loved ones who have loved ones buried on their property, and although the property is not federally considered tribal land, how are you planning on addressing those private grave sites?
So like I said, we will be out in the field identifying environmental resources of many types. We will be asking property owners if they have information about whether it be burial sites or any other environmental information that would be helpful, to please let us know. So if there are unmarked cemeteries, burial sites owned by anybody that are on a property that we ask to enter, then we would certainly ask for that information so that we can avoid it.
So you would build the turnpike around it?
We would do we are not going to go through a cemetery.
Okay. Speaking of Native Americans, are they taking any care to displace, any care about displacing the most vulnerable populations, such as elderly, economically disadvantaged, underrepresented minorities? Or are they planning to disperse these populations to minimize their voices and further disparage them by taking land that literally cannot be replaced in this state? I think it's a joke to say that you can't at least estimate how many homes will be displaced and how many people will be displaced. You say that you can't estimate that, but then in one statement you said, whenever Councilmember Schuler was talking to you about how would that south patch, how did you guys figure that out? And you had made some mention about time and things like that, and then once she dragged the question out and you thought she wanted you to say about the houses, you make sure that you didn't touch the most number of houses. How would you know that if you didn't do a house study, if you didn't know how many houses you were affecting? So a lot of things that you're saying are contradicting the other things that you're saying. You can't say that you can't do an estimate of houses, but then you chose the route that avoided the most houses. You also mentioned that you've heard questions about why didn't these conversations start 15 years ago, and then you said, but we're here now. I think that's 15 years too late. And I think for you to say that it could have been a mistake whenever the mayor asked about the year 99 outer loop being shot down here in Norman, you said it could have been a mistake that you didn't talk to us, and I think that that's hogwash. You avoided it, you avoided it, because our city does not want that here. And I don't understand how you guys as an authority in our state could come and do this when it was voted against being done in our city in 1999 without at least having a conversation with the mayor, with our city planner, with our city manager, with everyone that's doing all of these things in our city. We're a big city. We make a lot of big decisions and we make a lot of moves, and I feel like we do a pretty good job at working with people. But to blindside us like this and then act like you're playing nice is a load of crap, and I'm not down for it. That's all I got.
Thank you. Councilmember Tortorella.
As you can see by these questions, we're demanding transparency. Everyone wants to know the who, what, why, and when. I mean, you've heard these questions, and we've had our conversations, Mr. Kelly, you and I, and your staff. You're asking for our residents in Ward 5 to give up property, livelihood, memories, birth, deaths, funerals, everything that makes a home a home. These are not just structures, these are memories. So we took a run on Cinnamon Run, one of the home associations, the mayor and I, a couple of weeks ago. And I think you need to do the same thing too. I think there are wildlife sanctuaries you need to visit and talk to the residents. This should be part of the campaign to move forward. We're talking about individuals who have no place to go. And like Councilman Studley had just mentioned, it seems like we're taking advantage. It seems like the system is taking advantage of them with no recourse. So do we tie ourselves to a tree, or do we have an institute, the Granny Brigade, to protect the homes? No place to go, okay? There was a lady that spread her husband's ashes around the property. That is priceless. How do you compensate her for that? Now, you may miss her house. Hopefully you do, when you do your studies, and I read, the studies you have projected, and you miss these neighborhoods here. But I think you have to understand the gravity of what's happening here in Norman. The entire council is aligned on this 1,000%. You had made a mention when you started about no public funds being used for any turnpike project. So there was your January 25th, 2022 OTA regular meeting. In the minutes, item number 894, you guys had voted to take nearly $5 million in public funds. So is that a contradiction, what you said earlier, that you guys don't take public funds for any projects, or is that a mistake in the minutes? For a project, it's project SP-65. $4.9 million from the general fund.
Yeah, Councilman, I would have to read that agenda item in full. I don't know right off of what SP 65 is.
That's our program manager.
So that is OTA funds being utilized for the program manager contract.
Okay.
Those are not tax dollars. So public funds, earlier when I made mention of that, I talked about tax dollars. So ODOT represents the tax-supported system where they spend tax dollars collected either from the general fund or through fuel tax. When we build something, we either are selling bonds or we're leveraging our capital funds, which are mostly a piece of the toll collections.
Okay, so no public funds being used. This is all internal to OTA,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir. The one, and I'll say as an exception to that, is that we have two separate trusts, similar to a utility department. We have our 11 turnpikes that I've had the list of that was shown earlier. There is a 12th, which is the Gilcrease Turnpike on the west side of Tulsa. It has had federal funds spent on it through ODOT and through INCOG in that area prior to the Turnpike Authority becoming involved in it about 5 or 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. At that time, we were going to build a bridge across the Arkansas River. That portion of the project had not been federalized at that time, if I remember right. Because there have been federal funds spent on that, we're only state funds have been spent on our roadways, unless we're in partnership with something with ODOT where they're spending some federal funds on an adjoining project where we're just partnering. The Gilcrease stands alone on its own with federal funds having been spent on it. So the toll rate at that location on that section of highway is not tied to the rest of our network, and it has its own separate bank account, if you will, in how it operates. So that one, as a portion of our funding, we seeked a federal loan due to that project was not going to have an advantageous bond rating, so the interest rate was going to be high. One of our main goals is to provide a safe network. That's number one. And number two is to walk the thin line of keeping our toll rates as low as we can so that it is affordable to traverse across Oklahoma and use. Granted that you have to pay a premium to drive on our network, but we maintain a high level of service. The Gilcrease, because it had to stand on its own, would have received a lower level bond rating than our AA- that we currently have. That would have artificially inflated the tolls beyond just the cost of construction. So we took out a TIFIA loan with the federal government. That TIFIA loan is I believe, 30-year note, no different than the bonds that we sell. It has a 5-year delay to the first payment, so it gets to open hopefully this summer. It'll begin to grow and ramp up in traffic, and then we'll begin making the payments on the TIFIA loan in 5 years. Is that straight? Yes. So that aside, we don't get tax dollars other than that portion of a loan that we will pay back. And it was because the interest rate, I think, was somewhere around 1.7% interest, so extremely low, cheaper to build it today. With the cost of inflation, the interest is actually negligible. More than you asked. I apologize.
Okay, I appreciate that. Again, the big question mark and, the why. Why are we doing this? What's the economics behind this? So, historically, you guys have, not met your expectations on revenue projections on toll booths revenue. In fact, is it true that historically it's only 63% of the revenues generated on each toll road?
I'm not sure. Dr. Serrato said that today at our board meeting, and I'm not privy to exactly where she got that information. I know from my own experience, and I can ask Julie to come up here to maybe provide some background on that if she has any, but I know from my own understanding that back in the 70s and 80s, the projections that were done were not met. But more recently, our projections are always exceeded in more recent times. Would you like to add to that?
Just stated it accurately. Our traffic engineer is CDM Smith. They do our studies for our toll rates. They help us set those toll rates. They also work with us to set those projections. And in recent years, we have met our projections. I'm not sure where that number was quoted from today's meeting, but I would concur with what Joe has already said.
Will you guys release your revenue projections for like the last 10, 15 years? Is that something you can do? So we can actually see it?
We do have revenue projections in our annual budget,
Okay,
so we can definitely provide that information to you.
okay.
And that is available on our website as well.
All right, I appreciate that. I've got a bunch of questions too, but I've got three more regarding a school in Ward 5, Lakeview Elementary School. So have you guys considered the impact, like bus routes to that school on the east side of Norman, to and from home, to and from other parts of the city? Have you guys considered that impact, bus route impacts to Lakeview Elementary School?
Thank you for pointing that out. The answer to that question is at this time, no, but that's definitely something we can take a look at. I will say that in the areas of the John Kilpatrick, where we just built an extension near two different schools on the John Kilpatrick, we still provide ingress and egress across at any existing open facility, so you can still get from one side of the highway to the other on a city street or a county road. The other thing that typically comes up when we begin to talk about schools near any highway, whether that's a U.S. highway, state highway, interstate, or toll road, is that we fence our property line and we work with adjoining schools to make sure that the protection, the necessary protection, is there to prevent kids from wandering out onto a highway. That's no different on a state highway in a rural community than it is a major highway in an urban community.
All right. When you guys do your studies, have you ever done any studies on population increase, decrease around your turnpikes? I mean, that does affect property tax values. It affects schools, for example, and I think it's as important as environmental studies. So have you ever conducted studies about the population increase, decrease around the turnpikes?
I don't know. I'm not aware of any studies that exist like that the Turnpike Authority has done. I know that there have been some studies done by the state chamber on impacts and development, housing development, commercial development. They've done some studies that exist, in particular on I-35, I believe. Even some that exist for that would exist for Moore and Norman. I think that they have a study that is in particular focused on the John Kilpatrick.
Okay. One last question before I cede my time to the other counselors. You know, taxpayer dollars goes into our roads out here in the east side and all over Norman. So will you guys reimburse the city for any destruction to the roads and streets with your equipment as you are working this turnpike? So is that something you've done in the past? For us, it's important. You know, roads are important here, especially in the rural side, in Ward 5, in my ward. And from past construction, we've seen destruction of roads. Is that something you guys will reimburse or at least ensure that destruction of the roads are not going to be impacted?
That is excellent foreshadowing to the issue that comes up with any heavy construction. When we built the Kickapoo, when we widened the Turner Turnpike up on the east end, in and around Creek County, that was the very first piece that was under construction quickly and early. The route was already set. The Turner widening will go faster than any new alignment because of that. We impacted some of the county roads with the equipment that's brought to and from the construction site. we are not required statutorily to improve area roads that we utilize through construction. Now, there's a caveat to that. We are also excellent neighbors, understanding that Creek County didn't ask for the Turner Turnpike to be widened, and neither is Norman asking for a new alignment within their city limits. As we impact and cause damage to local roads, we try to build in a way that and this one will be unique in that we'll be able to gain access from the north side, hopefully from the turnpike alignment, and stay within our footprint for the most part, understanding that legal loads are gonna, be traveling these rural city streets. We have partnered with the counties and even the city of O'Hara, Oklahoma County, Oklahoma City to do patching, to do the area where we were working in eastern Oklahoma County, the roads weren't in the best of shape before we got there. We did video and picture evidence before we started, so we had a baseline so we could tell what impacts happened. Obviously, a loaded truck hauling rock or material to a project does significantly more damage than commuter traffic or even home building traffic that could be in that area for some housing development. We pay attention to those things. We'd be happy to work with the city manager and the public works office and the city engineers to monitor that and make adjustments going forward. We would have the responsibility to get it back to the condition it was in prior to us being there. That's what I would feel would be responsible. But if we can partner and leverage resources through an intergovernmental agreement to provide a better, provide something better than a patch, maybe an overlay, maybe a widening project, maybe an intersection project, could be a access project that better ties to the turnpike wherever we build an interchange, could be better access to and from the lake. Those are the kind of things that we want to work with and partner with the city of Norman on going forward.
Well, I appreciate your answers, and just keep in mind, these aren't questions we're throwing out or we're just pulling out of thin air. We're all concerned about what's happening to our city. So, I've got more questions. I'm going to cede my time and allow my fellow council members to ask their questions, but, there's a lot that we need answered. There's a lot that our constituents want answered, and we need to make sure that we ask those questions, and we make sure you understand and hope you understand that, we need to have these questions answered.
Mayor, may I have one quick response, because this issue keeps coming up, and I appreciate the statement. Councilmember Schuler, goes back to something that you said earlier, and Councilmember Studley. We're a month in, a little over a month into a 15-year long-range plan. We don't have all the answers, and we haven't talked to all property owners, and we don't know the answers to a lot of these questions. We are very early on. We are here today trying to prepare and partner with the city going forward on what could be a very nice project. The project here is not only for the city of Norman. By taking some of that traffic, whether it's the existing traffic or the growing traffic off of I-35, I-35 residents in Norman, or Norman residents that utilize I-35 will benefit. That traffic is going to grow on I-35. ODOT has lots of plans in their 8-year plan to do operational improvements to the interchanges. They don't have a plan to add additional lanes. So I just want to back up and touch on that we're very early on in this process, that we're trying to come up with as many answers as we can, and we are willing to meet with any of you and all of you individually, offline or here, to however it needs to take place to address as many of these concerns as we can. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Peacock.
Thank you. On average, how many acres are required for a typical turnpike interchange?
I wouldn't know that number offhand.
Can you, best guess? You guys have done a lot of these across the state.
Yeah, but I know about what they cost. I don't necessarily know exactly the number of acres. A lot of the times the terrain is a major factor with that. Whether the interchange is coming to a stop sign or a stoplight or a big interchange. You know, ODOT's got some pretty major interchanges in Oklahoma County and in Cleveland County having to do with I-35 and I-240 and some of those. They're multiple acre interchanges, but I don't know the exact number. And that would vary, again, depending on the exact location and how they're tied together.
Sure. Do you know how many acres that that wooded property is on the east side of Norman that you were proposing the one large interchange in? Just
No,
for
sir, I
comparison's
do not.
sake? Okay. How much of the proposed project budget is dedicated to environmental remediation?
I know we have an environmental estimate, I think, built into this. Do you have that number or know a number?
I don't. I can try to get to. So by remediation, are you referring to like cleanup of materials? Are you referring to mitigation?
I think either or.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't think the budget, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
Misunderstood the question.
No, you're fine. I think until we know exactly what needs to be mitigated or remediated, we can't really put a number to that yet. But, you know, the Turnpike will come up with the best solution in consultation with those agencies. I don't think they're going to be, you know, there's not a cap or a number that we say, this is as much as we're going to spend and no more.
But there are no dedicated funds particularly.
I'm sorry?
There are no dedicated funds per se?
Nothing that's been earmarked specifically as far as I know.
Okay.
We don't earmark like that, our funds.
Okay. Are you familiar with a phenomenon called induced demand?
Induced demand?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
It's this idea that, you know, just by increasing roadway capacity, it encourages more people to drive and thus failing to improve congestion. So I just think that that's something you guys really need to look into if you haven't already. Has the OTA studied the changing demographics regarding car ownership in younger generations?
The answer to that would be no. We haven't
sorry.
studied that.
Okay, I had a follow-up on that. If your traffic forecasting, you know, took into those new trends, that there will likely be less individual drivers on the road in the future.
Understand that. I have been a part of several seminars and presentations having to do with autonomous vehicles, vehicle share that could be in the future. A lot of the things and there are conflicting opinions on that, depending on, like my kids or my grandparents that don't drive a whole lot, would utilize an autonomous vehicle and generate additional trips. I've also heard that because there will be less vehicle ownership, because people would share vehicles, that might generate fewer trips. The other side of that is that a vehicle drops you, sir, off at work and then comes to my house to pick me up, to take me to work, and then goes and picks somebody else up. That actually generated 2 trips to take you to work and 1.5 or 1 trip to come and get me. So there's some conflicting information that I'm aware of, but
It's still
I'm
a vehicle on the road.
no way an expert on that.
Understandable. Has the OTA studied vehicle emissions from the large number of cars currently traveling on existing turnpikes?
The answer to that is no. We do know that the congestion on I-35 contributes heavily to and any standstill traffic, whether it's on I-35 or I-44 or other roads, contributes heavily to, lost the word, to the emissions in the area. I'm sorry.
Would you care to postulate how those emissions might impact the Little River or Lake Thunderbird? That is our drinking supply, as other people have mentioned.
I have no information on that at this time.
Okay. So in your presentation, you pointed to a lot of negative impacts from traffic, such as accidents, congestion, increased travel time. Given all these, why hasn't the OTA embraced a more sustainable transit options, such as passenger rail, which would eliminate all of those negative impacts while simultaneously not damaging the environment or taking people's homes?
I appreciate you bringing up the passenger rail discussion. Nothing that we are proposing in this plan inhibits the possibility of future passenger rail. Nothing that ODOT is doing either inhibits that. And in fact, where we're proposing to cross the BNSF, I'm sure that as we consult with them on their needs and desires in that location, we'll provide additional space for, I'm sure they'll would like for us to provide additional space for future rail lines. The reality there is that, you know, for the traffic that we're talking about, hundreds of thousands of vehicles a day growing to 100,000 vehicles a day, growing to 200,000 vehicles a day. The number of people in those vehicles, a regional transit rail line, even running multiple trains full of people, doesn't have a significant impact on congestion, on the people who are in the vehicles. We're in support of regional transit and the rail line. I'm aware of it. I've been to a couple of the meetings on it in the past, both in my, while I was still at ODOT and even since I've been at the Turnpike Authority, because I like to understand where that is and how it's moving forward. But
Appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Follow up on a commuter rail. Why don't ODOT pay for that instead of making taxpayers pay for it through the RTA?
again, this is Brian Taylor, the Chief Engineer for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation.
Excellent.
Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity. Your question, why does ODOT not pay for commuter or pay for commuter rail? First, ODOT supports all forms of transportation. Commuter rail is typically supported by the community, and the community is one of the funding parties that bring it forward. We'll certainly be a part of it, but we're not. We are not we should not be the sole provider for rail, for commuter rail. We're certainly supportive of it. When you look at the other areas where commuter rail existed, it existed as communities coming together and funding it by communities. We're certainly in support of that, and we're more than willing to help.
Well, hopefully we can maybe lead the way and change that perspective, because it is transportation, so it would seem like a good fit there. We will turn to Councilmember Hall.
Okay, thank you for coming tonight and talking to us. We appreciate you being here and bringing your team with you. We have covered a lot of territory, so I'm going to run through maybe a few things that we haven't completely touched on yet. But to follow up on this whole thought of regional transit and commuter rail that our Regional Transit Authority and ACOG has been working on for decades. So I'm just wondering what the intersection is with your conversations as you develop the Access Oklahoma plan. Are there any conversations going on how that meshes with decades-long work that ACOG has moved towards? We've created a Regional Transit Authority, and I'm just wondering how you collaborate or coordinate along those lines.
Thank you for that. We have reached out and visited a couple times with ACOG, specifically about this program just in the last month and a half or 2 months. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we've participated with ACOG on is gathering some of the traffic numbers that they have for the area that ODOT oversees, being the interstate, has in pavement readers that they're picking up some of that traffic. ACOG, we got some of the information from them for Indian Hills Road, for some of the area streets. So we are visiting with ACOG. We have not met specifically to discuss, that I'm aware of, the commuter rail.
Okay. I also just want to make a more general comment about there's obviously a dramatic impact on the rural part of our city and our community in Ward 5 and the east side of town. We've been really focused on that, but also I don't think it's an understatement when the mayor says that this changes the character of our city completely. And so any of these decisions and any of the ability to have an interaction or an impact on how this goes really affects every single person in Norman. And I'm wondering if you've ever had a project that literally affects the watershed, not only for our city, but for 2 other cities, Norman and Oklahoma City, and also impacts the delivery of water to not only Norman, but to Midwest City and Del City. So it's not only impacting our water supply, but it also has regional implications of, you know, how we move forward with that. And I think, obviously, you've picked up on that is, there are many areas of concern, but the environmental impact and the impact on our watershed and the fact that we already are dealing with an impaired water supply in Lake Thunderbird. So, you know, the impact there is not only on our city, it's on our regional partners, and how our water is supplied. So is there any kind of discussions with other municipalities whose water supply is literally going to be affected?
So the answer to your question is no. But we cross in 2 locations and are built all in the watershed for Lake Overholser. We're built in the watershed for Hefner Lake here in the metro area. I-40 and US 69 cross the Lake Eufaula in several locations. There are state highways and turnpikes that impact Grand Lake that we cross a lot of watersheds. Lake Thunderbird will be a little bit different for us. During the construction of the Kickapoo, we were in the watershed for West Watkins Reservoir. So we've worked in a lot of those locations. One thing that I think is important to point out, and we know that the area that we're proposing has some wetlands in it. I'm sure. I just know that for a fact. When we impact wetlands, we usually have to mitigate for those at some form of ratio. So if we take out an acre, it's usually required that we got to put back 2 acres or more. And as we look at the west side of Lake Thunderbird, and I was made aware, and I don't remember who told me, but somebody said that the city of Norman was looking for some additional funds to work on water quality out at Lake Thunderbird. And I don't have any intimate knowledge about it. I just know that it's being talked about. As we work in that area, we will need to mitigate and build wetlands someplace. On previous projects, we have done that on OTA property where we maintain it into the future. We've done it where that property has become property of a municipality, or have done it even in locations where it's been done on private property to build additional wetlands. So with this project could be the opportunity to improve, in that case, the water quality, or at least work with folks that are expert in those areas to do that for Lake Thunderbird.
Yeah. While I understand that, I'm really interested in learning about how we actually talk about the mitigation and that kind of thing. And, you know, again, to just kind of give the story of Norman, there have been years worth of city councils when none of us were here that have made decision after decision after decision to protect our watershed, to limit development on the east side of town. I mean, one of the reasons we annexed a large part of East Norman is to protect our watershed. And so it's just hard to wrap your head around how even the most aggressive mitigation strategies are going to fit with what our plan has been for years. I mean, it was brought up briefly, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it literally has direct access on our land use plan, our transportation plan, our stormwater plan. All of these things have been built over years with studies done over years, and I don't see any way around having to update all of those things. And there's just a lot of implications that no matter what you can do, is it enough to completely disrupt a portion of our community that was never intended to accommodate a turnpike? So that leads back to some of our conversation about the environmental impact, and I'm encouraged to know that you have a long list of resources that you're going to contact. I would actually like to see that list of resources, and I'm wondering if it also includes contacting nonprofit agencies. In particular, you may or may not already be aware that we have a nonprofit agency that makes a difference not only in our community but regionally, WildCare, and there's very direct impacts on them. I think there are other nonprofit agencies that have some concerns. So would those be entities that you would also add to your list to consult? Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think you bring up something that's important, which is that agencies and people with jurisdiction over resources certainly need to be involved, but there are others that also need the opportunity to give input. And so we welcome input from anybody at any time. And whether we send a letter that says, please give us your input or not, we welcome that. And there's a way to, I think, submit comments on the website. There's certainly ways to contact our team, especially when it comes to, there are resources in the area, in the environment that need to be considered. So yes, I would say that nonprofit, if there are others, we would take those recommendations and add them to our list, and I'm happy to share the list that we've already compiled.
Okay, and I'm not, I've got a couple of other questions, but I also have a question just for our city manager. I don't know how we actually coordinate that or if we involve our own communications director, but I think it's really important to have very specific pass or identify exactly what you're saying. Who do you contact? How do you contact them? I also took note and want to repeat it of what you said earlier, that you're also interested in individuals who may have information that you would never have access to, i.e. The resident that who scattered her husband's ashes on their property. I think that we have a lot of property owners in rural Norman that have held that property for a very long period of time that will probably have access to things that you may not be able to discover on your own. So I want to make sure that we have a very clear path on how people contact you. And so obviously you are interested in gathering input. So when you encounter resistance or, with information, then what happens? I mean, how do you mitigate it? How do you negotiate? How do you arrive at some kind of satisfactory conclusion?
Sure. So all of the information that we gather, whether it be through our own studies or through information that we get from the public or from other agencies, is all looked at holistically in terms of what's in the corridor, what's the best solution to meet the needs of the project, but also minimize impacts as much as possible. So mitigation will take different forms depending on the resource impacted, the wishes and desires of either the person involved or the agency involved. And it's a conversation that occurs once we know more about what the impact's going to be. There are typical things that are done. Joe talked about wetland creation and maintenance. That's one solution that can be done for waters. There may be others. the nice thing about some of this process is that's up to us as OTA and as the community to kind of come to that solution together.
Okay. Then the other thing that I was wondering about is when you're doing these environmental impact studies, what standard are you using? And I don't know the answer to this, but it is my understanding that there is a difference from meeting state-level environmental impact benchmarks versus federal environmental impact benchmarks. So for example, our lake is managed by a federal agency, the Bureau of Reclamation. And I believe, at least in your current information that's offered on the website, that it appears that there are multiple places where it does cross Bureau of Reclamation authority, I guess. So does that kick in to a federal environmental study?
Yes.
Okay.
So there are differences, like you mentioned, between federally funded or permitted or projects that cross federal land. Do have to follow a different environmental process than the Turnpike would normally have to follow if they're not using federal funds or any of that. So in the case of Lake Thunderbird, where there is that federal property, if we did end up with an alignment that wanted to use any of that property, then we would be in a federal environmental, what we call the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. We would be in a situation where that would be, that would apply.
Okay. And can you describe or just compare and contrast in a general kind of way what the difference is in the benchmarks?
Right. Yeah, you're fine. Right. So the studies that we do, and the permits that we're getting from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that I mentioned, those are federal permits. And so the studies that we're doing are all done to comply with federal law that covers all of those environmental resources. So regardless of the fact that the Turnpike is not federally funded, and even on parts of the program that are not on federal land, all of those studies will be done to meet requirements of federal law, Endangered Species Act, National Historic Preservation Act, Clean Water Act.
Okay.
So there's no difference in the way we conduct our studies for the Turnpike versus what we would do for ODOT or any other agency that had federal funds.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because I think that's been a big misunderstanding.
Yes.
So I guess my final question for you would be, how can we better align getting, which seems like to me a very in-depth studies that need to be done, as you mentioned, with all of these different agencies, wildlife, endangered species, geologic formations, the federal authority over the lake, the fact that we're an impaired lake and we're working with DEQ to meet their requirements. It is concerning that we're going to be maybe getting the cart before the horse before we have a complete understanding of what all of the impacts are, because I think we all expect that to be considerable, and that the mitigation of any of it or all of it would really have to be worked out before we advance very much farther on doing these other right-of-way acquisitions and stuff like that. So I don't know how we move the needle there to have that information up front, because like I said, I'm only really concentrating on the environment. There's lots of other lanes here, but I would say that because it is a direct threat to an already impaired water source, that is a fundamental understanding that we have no matter what. And, to your point, Mr. O'Kelly, about why you think this is important in diverting traffic and all of that kind of thing, it's been really hard to understand what the cost to benefit is for the city of Norman. I understand what you're saying about diverting freight, commercial trucks and that kind of thing, but it's just really, I haven't figured out yet a real plus side of how this benefits the city of Norman in any way. It's diverting traffic, it's maybe making easier for commuters to use I-35, I get that, but the cost to our community is enormous. So that's, I think, what we're really trying to sort out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And building on that, some people will say, well, it's just a road. Like, what's it going to do to your environment? And you can kind of overlook even the emissions from the vehicle. But what about the development that will follow? I mean, future councils are going to have to do. I'm glad I hopefully only have one more term left in me, because that's going to be an ongoing battle to try and protect it. And the door was opened because of this turnpike that we didn't ask for. So your battle may be over when you start turning dirt, but it will be a forever battle for the city of Norman. And again, it's not just the touchy-feely, feel-good, I love birds. It's our drinking water, which is a really big deal. But I want to switch directions a little bit and talk more about the homes impacted. So we have no idea how many homes are going to be impacted, but with the previous extensions, it seems that the one that's coming through the south extension is going to be significantly more than any other communities have faced before. Would that be accurate?
Again, I don't know the exact number, so I can't speak to it. I do not think it's significantly more than have been impacted on any other route that we've done in a near to a metropolitan area like Norman. Will we impact homes? I'm sure that we will. I don't know the number, and it's not more than we ran into probably on the Kickapoo.
Good. Well, it sounds like you have a kind of frame of reference to answer this next question.
Okay.
What percent of the homeowners that were forced to relocate actually stayed in that city? Because we're losing residents, ad valorem, and sales tax revenue from these residents that are now going to be displaced.
I don't have an answer to that question.
So that'll be another fallout that the city of Norman will have to deal with simply to relieve traffic. So in terms of ad valorem, right now it's the city asking these questions, but we have ad valorem partners here as well. Are you going to reimburse them for the property valuation that we've lost because of the impact to ad valorem overall?
I don't know the answer exactly to that question. I don't think that that's been done before.
Well, we're going to do a whole lot of new things in Norman, Oklahoma this time around. So another question that I had, how long will it take to pay off the $5 billion in bonds?
Typically we sell bonds in 30-year, we sell 30-year bonds. We don't anticipate a bond sale for about another year to fund the early initiative projects. We're not going to sell $5 billion in bonds next year, so it'll be a correlation of how fast we're spending it to how fast we need the money. Whatever year the last bond sale would be in, it'd be 30 years from that year to pay off this initiative, which again is not just this piece, but includes the widening on the Will Rogers and Turner and all the improvements that are being made other places.
I think the wild card too is just the economy, not just the local economy, but national economy with interest rates and all of that fun stuff. I think it'll be more expensive for you for your building process, like it is for everyone building anything. But then it's going to be more expensive to buy homes for these people that are also displaced. So is there going to be any sort of consideration to the change of the market when people are having to look for new places to live?
So the appraisal values, and Mr. Gore can speak to this, but the appraisals when we're doing them for properties will be done at the time of the acquisition. So that means that if somebody waits to have their property purchased, I want to back up. There are multiple options that we have that we're able to utilize when we have a long-range plan like this. There are multiple pieces and phases to this as I stepped through the 5 priorities earlier on. If somebody's property is or a couple different ways of this happening, but if somebody's property is in a later phase or the actual home itself is not impacted. This happened several times on the Kickapoo, where they had a long piece of property. Their house was up on Luther Road, for instance, and we crossed somewhere in the back, and they operated a farming operation of some kind. But it was so impacted that they elected and negotiated a total take. So we bought the entire piece of property, whatever that was. we entered into on several occasions, long-term lease agreements, not anything where we're actually charging. It's a part of the negotiation of their settlement for them to remain in the home. So we pay them, and then they can stay living there. And we did that on 12-month terms, and then would extend it as necessary. Very rarely, understanding that the housing market is different today, very rarely did somebody go beyond 4 or 5 months before they found a different house that they wanted to move to. I don't know where, we don't keep track of where people move to after we acquire property or where they purchase additional property. The other thing that happens sometimes through our right-of-way acquisition process is we do what we call land swaps, where maybe that person that I just talked about we only impacted a few acres and they had 15 or something on the front side, and then the adjoining neighbor still wants to live in their house, and instead of compensation through a cash compensation, they seek for a land swap, in which case we would have purchased neighboring property maybe, and we're able to enter into a land swap. That does happen, or at least we work on it. We try to be flexible and do whatever we can to make sure that both parties are as happy as they can be, understanding that they didn't ask us to come and purchase their property, and they didn't have a for sale sign in their yard most of the time.
So let's talk Rose Rocks. That's another key piece of this unique environment that we're putting a turnpike on top of. What's been your conversation about that unique geological wonder in that area?
Kirsten's the expert on this, obviously. I have known that there are Rose Rocks in Oklahoma. I'm from southeastern Oklahoma originally, and I've known there are Rose Rocks in Oklahoma. Up until a few weeks ago, I was unaware of the concentration that was in this area. So it'll be interesting, and a lot of places I've gone, people have shown me Rose Rocks. Dr. Serrato brought one today that was about this big. Somebody else described one that was multiple feet by multiple feet in size. Those were all things that are very interesting to me. Please go ahead.
So he says I'm an expert, but I'm not a geologist, so can't claim to be a Rose Rock expert. However, we do know their significance to not only this area, but to the state as a whole, and their uniqueness and as a cultural symbol as a state rock of Oklahoma. We have spoken with Dr. Serrato about the outcrop of sandstone that occurs where these things form, and have asked her to provide us with information about specific locations so that, again, we can map those along with all of the other environmental information that we'll be mapping, and then can, again, assess where our corridor may or may not intersect with those rocks.
So we haven't done any studies. I understand that's in the process. That'd be another suggestion going forward. We like to make data-driven decisions here in Norman, so it'd be nice to have data before you make life-changing decisions. So let's say the data rolls out and the traffic shows it's really not going to lighten much, or the environmental impact is so devastating. Like, what is it going to have to get to for you to go, you know what, this just isn't worth it, or it's not appropriate? Like,
Well, okay. So I think it's a general question about at what point does it become not worth it?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
I don't know the answer to that, standing here today. We are data-driven, or at least we try to be. I think that we're going to continue to weigh this information as it comes in, both the survey information that we just gathered, the engineering information, and then the environmental information as it's being provided. And again, the goal that I would have is to work with the city, or partner with the city, if you will, in working with the city manager, public works director, and your engineers to make this project the best that it can be. If we run into something that creates a no-go situation, and I don't know what that is standing here today, then we will back up and punt and figure out what the next step is. There's enough. I don't think that there's going to be something out there, but there could be. So I want to leave myself the leeway to say that. But I don't have an answer beyond, I really don't know what exactly that final straw would be that would create a situation where this would stop.
Sure, if we found a bunch of oil, it would stop and we'd find a way around it. But, so, I guess, it's just obviously concerning. Everyone's very emotional. It's hard not to be. I really appreciated Councilmember Peacock's questioning about, we're looking towards solving today's problems, not looking towards a future that looks at transportation differently, that's actually more environmentally friendly. Like, we're banking on continuing to destroy our climate and the environment, which is sad. I think we should be planning in a different direction, but I'm obviously not in your position. So that's concerning. The people aspect that Councilmember Tortorello mentioned, I mean, the woman showed me the pictures of her home and her dead husband, and had tears in her eyes as she told me about the ashes she spread in the house they just gave to their children. I don't know how you put a price on that. Priceless. It is. And then the environmental, how much public input was taken? I mean, none, right? This is purely data-driven, not people-driven.
Thank you for bringing that up, and it's actually something that if I can turn back to the screen for just 1 second, that we have just recently posted. Actually, I think this went up earlier today. Under the Updates tab, we have listed out and scheduled the public meetings for this south extension and the east-west loop connector. So we have Noble, Newcastle, Norman, and more locations established here. We've been actively working on this for several weeks, and this is the first time that it's really being made public is right here, right now. The Secretary Gatz read these off this morning. I wanted to stop and pause right here on the public meetings piece because we're going to update this. And the other thing that's glaring at me at the bottom of the screen is the podcast. So Kirsten McCullough did a podcast on environmental. I think it's located under some of the frequently asked questions, or maybe it's under the media portion that's up at the top. I don't see media now. So there's a podcast that's there. I think that one is long, and it's me walking through the entire program. You can skip through it and hear basically what I think I probably said today, having to do with the south highways. But there's also a podcast, and I don't want to fish around for it in front of everybody. But there's one that's directed specifically to the environmental aspects of this particular segment of road. And we're going to continue to update those as information comes. This engineering and building of roads is not very glamorous during this phase. And so there's not a lot that people really want to tune into. We will provide updates as we get them, and it's slow. It doesn't just happen overnight. We're going to work over the next several months, and we'll provide updates through this. So again, just want to continue to point people to this accessoklahoma.com website.
Well, thank you for providing these dates. When I had met with Secretary Gatz, he said that they were coming. So I'm sure you'll have a lively turnout on Tuesday, April 19th at the Central Library, which is a beautiful building, by the way. So I know that this is very hard on all of you. It's probably the least favorite part of your job. We make tough decisions every time. I led during a pandemic. Not one decision was easy. I get it. And someone's got to lose. But I think I made decisions that were best for my community at that moment and long term because I considered the people. And what you're about to do is you can't undo it. You just can't. I mean, we don't have a time machine, so we can't go back and un-traumatize a large portion of our community. You've met some of them, I hear. And it's just beginning. So I know your job's not easy, and I know it's not personal, but I do not think this is the right course of action, at least the right area. And my council agrees. Many of our residents agree, obviously the ones directly impacted by it. And so I'll look at you just like I did Secretary Gatz and ask you, don't do this in Norman. On the record, in front of my colleagues, in front of YouTube, makes it real. just don't. And they're not going to make it easy for you. I can sit back and let the residents take over because their stories matter. I've asked the city manager to send out a letter to the properties impacted that we can tell with this, 1,200-foot area, because I want to hear these stories and I want to share them with the public and I want to share them with you, because at the end of the day, I hope you're able to sit back and say it was worth it for traffic. It's so impersonal, and it's certainly not the kind of Oklahoma standard that I've become accustomed to since I've moved here. So, Councilmember Schuler.
Just, I guess, more comments at this point, just kind of underscoring some of the other things that my fellow council members have said. And I really, really want to highlight what Councilmember Peacock was talking about in terms of thinking about the longevity of not only this toll road, but really thinking about what this impact is to our community. I went along with Councilmember Peacock, Councilmember Hall, to a conference this last week, the Congress for New Urbanism, and I kid you not, there were multiple sessions and multiple times that we heard about communities either asking to and working through the process to tear down or relocate interstate highways because of the impacts, the negative impacts that they have on their cities. And they said that there are 60 communities across this nation that are currently seeking that process. I'm really concerned that if we do this, that Norman is going to be one of those communities 50 years from now. And talking about the impacts and how this is going to substantially change what this means for our community and how it is splitting us in half. I don't have a lot of faith in what our nation has done with the interstate highway system and thinking about communities and how they have split populations, specifically, underrepresented and marginalized communities in our country. And so, I can't help but hearken back to those things and think about what is this going to do to our community and how is that going to, continually impact us. So I think what we're trying to do here is not get to that point where 50, 100 years down the road, we didn't think about all of the mitigations now to not do something and to think about another way, another route, another opportunity, another mode of transportation that, was going to serve us better. And I think that that's really where a lot of us are. What does this do for Norman? How does this impact us? What is our future? And so I think I'll just leave kind of my comments there for now.
Councilmember Tortorello.
I want to thank you guys for showing up tonight, and we're usually hospitable, but this is something that we strongly believe that we're all in alignment, that we are against this road. And I'm going to echo the same thing we've been echoing for the last month and a half since this was announced, or a month, is that don't do this to Norman. We don't want this here. There's no economic value to the city of Norman. In fact, this bypasses the city of Norman. There are no stops, there's nothing they can get off, and there's no place they can visit. It's a bypass. It's like flying over Oklahoma, that term flyover country. That's what you're going to make us. You're going to make us drive through country, and we don't want this. My constituents were there today. They showed up and they voiced their opinion, and I'm in agreement with this, that I'm going to let them run with this too. They're telling you that they don't want this, and there are a lot of stories. And we are data driven, but we are also, in this case here, people driven. And we'd like you to come by and visit these families in these homes and wild care and wildlife and see the impact of this road, the impact of this turnpike, which we just don't see any value. Going back to the public discussions today, some were asking, on your agenda, you said that there are public discussions or the public can speak. Do they have to sign up for those the next time they want to come by and talk to you guys? at OTA for your regular meetings, your board meetings?
To add an agenda item to an agenda, the way this worked this time, I was not a part of the last program when people were allowed to speak, but the way this worked this time, a request was made by Dr. Serrato. She was the only request that we received this go-around for this board meeting. We were able to accommodate that request with some parameters. She was given a time limit, and obviously our board was not there to answer any questions. Those types of avenues are going to be better served. Those types of questions are going to be better served at these public meetings. We're going to provide all the experts there. The people that we have here today are individuals, but they have teams that will be able to answer questions of every individual and their individual question, which is unique at those meetings. But that's how that process was with Dr. Serrato for this morning.
Okay. Going back to NEPA, I want to circle back on that. Are you agreeing to a voluntary study through the reclamation process, the zone, using NEPA? I just want to clarify. I know we discussed this. Councilman Hall brought it up. You'd answer that question, but are you guys going to conduct a NEPA study? Is that on the radar? It's part of all your environmental studies.
So I think I can say that we are going to perform NEPA at in the federal box areas where we intersect the interstate, both I-44, I-35, in 2 locations, and I-40. The section that was in discussion earlier around the lake, there are still some questions that exist around that. So I don't know the answer to that, because if a design alternative takes us out of lake property, then that may change the answer that I would give today to that question if we just assumed that we were impacting Bureau of Reclamation property. So the answer is yes in the federal boxes. The answer is maybe, depending on the impacts in that area and the property that we actually end up impacting. And I just don't know the answer to that question. Not trying to dodge it. As soon as I know the answer, I'd be happy to come back and answer yes or no.
Thank you. I had a bunch of questions, but they're already answered. But I have one for the city manager, maybe Sean O'Leary. When are we planning to do a study of the traffic patterns out there if this turnpike comes to fruition? I mean, we need egress, ingress. I mean, it's going to cause a nightmare for ambulance, first responders. I mean, is that something in our radar?
Councilmember Tortorello, that's a conversation and a staff recommendation. With council concurrence, our ability to form our internal team consisting of Mr. O'Leary and his transportation engineers and Mrs. Tiffany Verska, our chief communications officer, the ability to stay plugged into all of the multiple concurrent tasks that the OTA will engage in, we think will be mission critical in terms of our ability to provide our council with current information that we can then share with the public, and perhaps at the early stages of this process, that staff would commit to monthly updates that we would send out, maybe at the last week of every month. Our weekly reports that go out, we could dedicate an entire section to, here's the current status of all of these steps engaged by the OTA. And we, Mr. O'Leary and his team, they're plugged in at ACOG and ODOT regularly. We have not been, a regular component of OTA because up until this project, it really wasn't a function of Norman's transportation plan. But we would like to engage with the OTA, and a couple of council members have indicated things like we have a comprehensive plan, and it describes land uses and zoning and how Norman will grow in the future. And obviously that changes pretty dramatically when you change circulation. We have a transportation plan that we would need to update. and based on transportation and land use, could absolutely have an impact on our sewer master plan and our water master plan. And we know we've got wells that are right under the blue line, some going east and west and some going north and south. So mitigation measures that we would pursue through this process would include the ability to update the comprehensive plan, transportation plan, sewer master plan, water master plan, and even stormwater master plans. So we would like to work at council's direction to bring to you those proposals on how we will update those plans that will impact how Norman grows. And even on a maybe even a more pressing matter, we have a voter-approved project. It was bond-approved, I believe, in 2012, Mr. O'Leary, at the 36th Avenue Northwest widening project that would go from Tecumseh to Indian Hills, including a substantial investment in the intersection of Indian Hills and 36 Northwest. And we would need to find out sooner rather than later how our plan that our voters have approved, and we actually have, bond money in the bank ready to go, how do we coordinate that, and what does that look like in the final project? So those are things that staff sees as being on the front burner, not the back burner. And with council concurrence, we would proceed on those fronts.
All right, no further questions. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Councilmember Studley.
I did have one other question. I know that somebody had asked about environmental impact from traffic, or just traffic impact, but what have you guys studied, or have you studied any environmental impacts in rural communities where you've put turnpikes in the past?
I'm sorry, it may be getting late. Can you please ask that one more time?
Has the OTA ever done an environmental impact studies of what their turnpikes have done in rural areas in Oklahoma in the past?
I think the answer to that is no, not that I'm aware of. Now, when we come, for instance, on the Turner Turnpike, because what you're basically, I think what you're asking is, when we went through Stroud, Oklahoma with the Turner Turnpike, have we ever done a follow-up study to see what the impact was, the environmental impact?
Or
was?
Blanchard, or going down to Chickasha,
yeah,
all those. Have you done any environmental impacts to the farmland?
I think that the answer to that is going to be no. I was made aware that a study existed that had to do with salt that we use on, for snow and ice work, that there was a study done having to do with that. If I can get my hands on that, I'll provide it to you. The biggest, and Kirsten can explain this, and she's explained it before. The biggest environmental impact is usually to especially water, is usually during the construction because of all the exposed soil. Not any different than a housing development or commercial development. We do a lot of we put a lot of effort into capturing runoff sediment.
Well, we as a city have actually banned commercial development that far east, as well as housing developments that far east. And there's a reason that we did that, is to protect our water.
Yes.
So you're telling us to trust you to come into our city, but you've never done any environmental impact studies of what you guys have done or left along your turnpikes in the
I'll
past.
speak to the monitoring. Thank you.
Yeah, and certainly the sensitivity of that watershed is known and important. And one of the things that the Turnpike has engaged for the entire program is a compliance monitoring team, that their sole job will be to, when the program is under construction, to be in the field, making sure that the contractors are following all of the rules and requirements that are put on them by, whether it be the Army Corps through their permit or DEQ through any process, or any other environmental commitment that may come out of the studies that we're performing. They will be monitoring that, reporting, documenting, and making sure that the contractor is following all of that, all of those procedures.
It's still very scary because you are messing with our watershed, and mistakes happen. They do happen. And how are you going to mitigate that if it happens? There goes our not only our drinking water, but Midwest City and Dell City as well. Another thing that I just wanted to point out, and then I'm also through with my questioning or comments. You guys had mentioned about This taking truck traffic off the road and kind of bypassing I-35 and alleviating that. And one thing that I do want to point out, at a meeting earlier today, prior to Dr. Amy speaking, a state trooper was up there talking. And I'm sure you guys all heard, if you were at the meeting, that there is no place for truckers to currently pull off, and they're having to pull off on the side of the road. And the state troopers have to knock on their windows and say, hey, you've been here long enough, it's time for you to go. But we have requirements that these truckers are required to pull over and take a break, preferably at a truck stop, once they've been on the road for so long. So you guys haven't even solved that problem from Tulsa to Oak City. So now how are you going to solve it going from Purcell all the way to Tulsa? I saw in your map that you drew a little inlet or whatever in the middle of a bunch of forest, a bunch of wooded area. So what, you're going to put a truck stop out in the middle of nowhere? And if not, where do you propose for these truckers to stop?
What you're seeing on the map, I believe to be the interchange. We're not proposing to put in a truck stop on any of these segments, although if it was a request, we could discuss it.
So all of those little parts where it has like going through the wooded area in Norman, where it has open spots, I thought you said, thought you told her that that was for gas stations.
No, those are interchanges for access onto and off of the turnpike, like a diamond ramp.
Right, and there was one that was really large, and we'll have to go back if there's minutes, but I could have sworn that you said something about a gas station, that was being built like that, so in the future, a gas station could be put there.
Oh, if I said that, that was a mistake.
Or a McDonald's or something like that.
No. So the model, the area that you're referring to that came up in our board meeting today, that the trooper's been working on, is on the east end of the Turner Turnpike. Again, that toll road was built in 1953 around cash collection. There were only the only places you could get on and off of it were in Oklahoma City. There was not an interchange that currently exists at Luther. There was not an interchange that currently exists at Wellston. You could get off at Chandler. You could get off at Stroud, Bristow, and then you were basically to the east end of the Tulsa area. So there were only 3 intermediate interchanges. And what we're trying to go back and solve, as what's on this map, is to add interchanges in between each of those interchanges. That is in this 15-year plan. If I'm still around 15 years plus after that, the next goal would be to add more interchanges so that trucks can get on and off of the turnpike. That section on the east end has a really wide shoulder. They started staging there. At first it started with 1 or 2 trucks. That has slowly grown to where the truckers that utilize the Turner Turnpike have developed a plan that they plan to stay on the eastbound or westbound side of the Turner Turnpike.
But there's no place for them to get off, right?
They installed signs a few weeks ago. I don't remember when the signs were, 3 or 4 weeks ago. Since they've installed those signs, they started knocking on windows and then issuing warnings, paper warnings to those truckers, because it's not the same people staying there every day.
I guess how is that fair to the truckers then? You're building this as a truck bypass so that they can get around, but then there's no place for them to pull over, but you're saying that this is a good idea.
We're trying to add additional places for them to get on and off so that they can get off of the interstate and find a safe place to park. That is always.
Where would they do that on the east side of Norman though?
Where would they do that on the east side of Norman?
Yeah.
We're not building a great big wide shoulders in this section that would facilitate truck parking. What's happened, if you will, what has happened is that number has gone from a handful of trucks to more than 100 trucks every night. After they started knocking on the doors or knocking on the windows, those trucks have reduced from more than 100 down to 15. They are staying either at our designated truck stops, which we do have on the Turner Turnpike, or they're utilizing the exits that already exist, or they're stopping prior to them turning out. They don't have to drive until they hit their limit and then immediately pull over. They can plan to pull over earlier, which is what most truckers are doing. They're coming into and out of Tulsa. The westbound side is no different than the eastbound side. They have all of Tulsa to find a place to stop and stay, and they decide to pull on the turnpike because it's extremely convenient. They can hit the shoulder. It's dangerous to have a stopped, non-crash-worthy vehicle on the shoulder of a road with the speed limit, and that particular section is 80 miles an hour. We put up signs at the OHP's request. They identified it as a safety issue. We've known it was a safety issue. Together, we're working together to add those signs and to continue to move them off of the turnpike.
I guess my point of all this is just to say, we're doing all of these things in hopes that these other things happen, but the turnpike that you've already created hasn't had that already happen, and you're already creating a dangerous situation for those truck drivers. So I just don't see, that doesn't sound promising, and it doesn't sound like anything that you're gonna bring to Norman is gonna be as effective and have these same types of issues is a little bit scary to me, especially out in the eastern part of town. So, I don't know. I'm done with my questioning. Did anyone else have anything?
Thank you. Councilmember Lynn.
I'm sure you folks feel like the torches and pitchforks are out for you sometimes from here and there. But I just want to say that I appreciate you turning out and answering questions. That is appreciated. Got one quick question that was sent to me. Can you clarify how the newly adopted right-of-way policy is different than what it was prior to being adopted this morning?
So the policy that we put on the board and was approved today on the board is basically the exact same we use for the driving forward, with just a couple of little formatting changes. I pull in its own section out for appraisal review. It was combined with appraisal to make it more clear. We pulled that into its own two separate paragraphs. We also qualified, how the process for utility relocations would be utilized. And with this being a 15-year program and also having capital improvements, the previous policy only applied to driving forward. So we basically wanted to take what's in driving forward and continue it along and apply it across to keep uniformity across this bond program and any capital purchases to keep uniformity and put that out there to have that in place.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? I share my appreciation for your time tonight. It's always a fun time in the Norman City Hall. Tough questions and not a lot of answers, but we understand you're not that far along, which is also part of our frustration. So I look forward to continuing this line of communication and doing everything we can to find a solution that works for Norman residents, not just truck drivers.
Mayor, thank you for having us today. I do want to apologize for how this rolled out and not being able to visit with you prior to the formal announcement. We can talk about that some other time.
I'm sure we will.
There were other groups that were not informed, including all of the area legislators. And I apologize, and I have apologized to all of them for how this is done. Our processes are a little bit different. We are Oklahomans, and we have to represent Turnpike Authority and how and the process that we have to operate within. So there are certain things that have happened through this that we are not happy with about the way it's gone, and you may or may not be able to believe me, but we understand in some cases where you sit and where somebody whose area is highly affected sits and the opinions that you have on our process. So I wanted to formally apologize for that. And then I also want to tell you thank you for having us tonight so that we could answer some of these questions. And I apologize that it's taken me a month to get here.
Thank you.